My daughter slapped me across the face at my own dining table and shoved a stack of papers toward me. "Sign it," she said coldly. "This house should belong to me anyway." My 8-year-old granddaughter burst into tears while my son-in-law quietly locked the front door behind him. They thought an old widower living alone on $15 million of coastline would eventually break and hand everything over. So I picked up my pen, smiled, and signed exactly where they wanted. What my daughter didn't know was that the moment she forced that pen into my hand, she had already stepped into a trap 30 years in the making, built from every lesson my wife ever taught me about the difference between love and surrender. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, do me a quick favor, drop a comment with one word describing how you're feeling today. I read every response, and your honesty truly matters to me. Quick note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What stays with you is the lesson that's what really counts. She wanted the deed to my house, and she said it in front of my granddaughter during breakfast. I was sitting alone on the weathered deck of Whale Nose Point Estate that Friday afternoon, when the black Mercedes SUV rolled up my gravel drive 3 years after my wife died, and 3 years since I'd heard my daughter's voice. The September wind pulled whitecaps off the Atlantic, and I was 60 years old, a retired geologist who'd spent 30 years mapping underground reserves for ExxonMobil and the USGS. I'd become very good at recognizing when the ground was about to shift. Sienna stepped out first. 32, my daughter wearing a charcoal suit that said, "Financial attorney," without trying too hard. She carried something wrapped in a kitchen towel, and even from 20 feet I could smell it: clam chowder. Not just any chowder. The exact recipe my wife Vera used to make every Sunday during fall, thick with Yukon potatoes, apple-smoked bacon, fresh little necks, finished with fried shallots pulled from the oil at precisely the right second. Vera had been gone 3 years, ovarian cancer at 57, and in those 3 years, Sienna had called me exactly 0 times. "Dad," Sienna said, climbing the deck steps, "I made your favorite, just like Mom used to." The passenger door opened, and my granddaughter exploded out Wren, Prescott 8 years old, all knees and elbows, and a powdered sugar smile. She sprinted across the gravel, clutching her rag doll, the one Vera had sewn by hand, and crashed into my arms. "Miss Pop-Pop," she shouted, "I missed you so much." Behind her, Xander Prescott climbed out 35, an architect who'd built one notable Manhattan building and 0 meaningful conversations with me. He stared at his phone and didn't look up. I held Wren longer than necessary, then looked at my daughter. Sienna was smiling, the kind of smile that looked practiced, designed to communicate warmth to someone not paying close attention. "Come inside," I said. 3 years without a single phone call, and today she walks in with Vera's exact recipe. The chowder was perfect. We ate at the long dining table Vera and I bought in 1995, with Wren between us, chattering about 2nd grade and a boy named Mason who ate glue. Sienna had set candles even though it was 3:30 in the afternoon, dimming the room, making it harder to see faces clearly. Xander said almost nothing. He cut his bread into precise squares and checked his phone twice. "I want you to picture the room because it matters. This house sits on 12 acres of Hampton's coastline, worth $15 million now. Vera and I designed it together in 1993, installed the shiplap walls ourselves over 2 summers. This house knows me. It's the only thing I own that my wife touched every single day of our marriage." Sienna set down her spoon and reached into her leather bag. "Dad, there's something I wanted to talk to you about," she said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "A charity lighthouse preservation foundation. They're restoring historic markers along the coast and need a staging area for equipment during the Montauk restoration." I opened the folder. Legal documents, maybe 40 pages. "It's just a formality," Sienna continued. "The foundation needs a property sponsor. Your land would be perfect close to Montauk water access. There's a small tax benefit for you. I've spent 3 decades reading contracts in oil fields where one misplaced decimal could cost $8 million. I learned to read the way a geologist reads strata, slowly, precisely looking for the breaks." I flipped to page 1. The candlelight made it harder, so I reached for my reading glasses and tilted the page toward the window. "At this says deed of gift," I said, very calm. "Whose name goes on the title after I sign?" Sienna paused. Half a second, but I caught it. "Both of ours," she said. "Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. It's standard for these partnerships. The foundation requires—" "This isn't a partnership," I interrupted, turning to page 7. This is an outright transfer. Paragraph 7, subsection C. Grantor hereby conveys all right, title, and interest in the property described herein to grantee effective upon execution. Grantee being you and Xander, not a foundation, not a charity, you. I looked up. Sienna was still smiling, but something behind her eyes had changed. Wren was drawing on a napkin with a crayon, oblivious. Xander had gone very still. And Dad, you're misreading it. Sienna said that careful attorney patience. It's structured that way for liability purposes. The foundation indemnifies. I'm not misreading anything, I said. This is a deed transferring Whale Nose Point Estate, all 12 acres, the house, everything to you, permanently, for $0. I set my reading glasses down and looked across at my daughter. Sienna was smiling, still but tighter now, and I realized I was looking at someone I didn't recognize. Not the girl who brought me kindergarten drawings, not the college student who called every Sunday, not even the attorney who stopped calling 3 years ago. I was looking at a total stranger. I thought of Vera and what she told me in that hospital room 3 years ago, 2 days before she died. She'd been holding my hand, morphine drip clicking, and she'd said it very clearly. If Sienna ever comes back after I'm gone, if she ever asks you for the house, don't give it to her. Not because she doesn't deserve it, because she'll destroy herself trying to take it. I folded the document and slid it back across the table. No, I said. Sienna's smile disappeared. Sienna's hands went flat on the table, and for 3 seconds, the only sound in the room was the ocean wind rattling the windows. You don't understand, she said, her voice tight and controlled. I need this. I am drowning in debt, Dad. Drowning. And you're sitting on $15 million of coastline you don't even use. I use it every day, I said. I live here. Alone, she snapped. In a house built for a family that doesn't exist anymore. Mom is dead. I have a life in Manhattan. Wren needs stability, a good school, a future. And you're going to take this land to the grave with you. I folded the manila folder and set it aside. My voice came out very calm. This is a deed of gift for the entire Whale Nose Point property. You are lying to me, Sienna. What happened next happened fast. Sienna's right hand came across the table and connected with the left side of my face hard enough that my reading glasses flew off and clattered onto the wooden floor. The sound was sharp and final, like a judge's gavel. Wren screamed. I didn't move. I sat very still, my cheek burning, and looked at my daughter. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed, and her eyes had gone wide, not with regret, but with something worse. Calculation. She was already deciding what to say next, how to justify it, how to make this my fault. Wren was crying now, clutching her doll, her small voice saying, "Mommy, Mommy, stop," over and over. Xander stood up from his chair. He didn't look at me. He walked past the table to the front door, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place with a metallic click. Then he locked the chain. Then he turned and leaned against the door, arms crossed, blocking the only exit. "You don't leave," Sienna said, pointing at me, her voice shaking, "until you sign." I bent down slowly and picked up my reading glasses. The left lens had a hairline crack running through it, but they still worked. I cleaned them against my shirt, put them back on, and looked at my daughter's face. I could see her clearer than I ever had before. For the first time in 32 years, I was looking at a total stranger. "Wren," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off Sienna. "Go upstairs to the guest room, the one with the blue curtains. Close the door." Wren didn't move. She was frozen, tears streaming down her face. "Now, sweetheart," I said softer. She ran. Her footsteps pounded up the stairs and a door slammed. Sienna sat back down across from me. Xander stayed at the door. The three of us sat in silence for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 47 seconds. I counted. "You think locking me in my own house changes anything?" I asked. "I think," Sienna said, "that you're an old man who lives alone on a cliff with no neighbors close enough to hear you yell. I think you're going to sit here until you understand that this is happening, whether you cooperate or not. And I think you're smart enough to choose the easy way." I said nothing. Sienna stood, pushed her chair back, and walked upstairs. Xander followed without a word. I heard their bedroom door close, then the muffled sound of Sienna's voice through the ceiling, angry and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. I sat alone in the dining room as the candles burned down and the light faded. Eventually, I moved to the kitchen and sat in the dark, staring at nothing. And I remembered, spring of 2020, 6 months before Vera died. She'd been in Southampton Hospital for 3 days, and I'd driven there every morning to sit beside her bed. On the third day, she asked me to close the door. She asked me to make sure Sienna wasn't in the hallway. Then she pulled an envelope from under her pillow. "I had Jonathan draft this," she said. Jonathan was our estate attorney, a man we'd known for 20 years. "It's a codicil to my will. Read it." I opened the envelope. The language was simple, just 2 paragraphs. The Whale-Nose Point estate would transfer to Sienna on her 35th birthday 3 years away on one condition. She had to come home once a month to cook a family dinner with me. 12 dinners a year for 3 years, 36 total. Awaya, I asked. "Because I know Sienna," Vera said. Her voice was tired but clear. "I've known her since she was 4 and started hiding candy instead of sharing it. She wants things, Arthur. She doesn't want people. And if she can't show up for 36 dinners over 3 years, then she doesn't deserve this house." "You're being too hard on her," I said. Vera looked at me with the expression she always used when I was being deliberately naive. "You love her more than I do," she said. "I accept that. Fathers and daughters. But you must promise me one thing. She gets the land at 35 if she comes home once a month for dinner. If she doesn't, it goes into a trust for Ren. No exceptions. Promise me." I promised. Now sitting in the dark kitchen with a cracked lens in my glasses and my daughter upstairs planning, God knows what I did the math. Sienna was 32. She'd turn 35 in November of 2026, 3 years from now. 36 dinners, once a month. She could have waited. She could have come home cooked. Vera's clam chowder sat at this table and talked to me about her life. And in 3 years, the house would have been hers. Legally, cleanly, no forgery, no locked doors. A good father and a wise father are not always the same man. I was a good father. I am not sure I was a wise one. I sat in the darkness and counted. 36 dinners, and she came back with a manila folder. But the strangest part was I wasn't entirely surprised, because I knew exactly what I had to do next. What I had to do next involved a fountain pen Vera gave me in 1998, a geological security measure I'd used in West Texas oil fields, and the willingness to let my daughter believe she'd won. I waited until 11 that night. Ren had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, curled around her rag doll. Xander sat staring at his phone. Sienna paced the kitchen heels, clicking in a rhythm that suggested calculations. I stood up from the dining table. "I'll sign it," I said. Sienna stopped pacing. She turned and I watched her face, the flicker of triumph she tried to hide. "You're making the right choice, Dad," she said, sliding the manila folder back in front of me. I pulled out the fountain pen from my shirt pocket. A Mont Blanc forest green with gold trim attached to a thin chain connecting to Vera's keepsake necklace. She'd given it to me when I signed my first major exploration contract in 1998, inscribed, "For the man who finds what others miss." What Vera never could have guessed was that the ink cartridge I'd installed in 2003 wasn't standard ink. It was specialized geological security compound we use for field authentication, proprietary signatures, on-chain of custody documents that needed verification but not permanent archiving. The formula bonded to paper fibers for 4 to 6 hours, then evaporated completely under sunlight or oxidation, leaving no chemical residue. It was designed to disappear. I unscrewed the cap, let my hand tremble slightly, and signed my full name, Arthur James Gallagher. The ink flowed dark blue-black, crisp and clear. Sienna snatched the document before the ink dried. "Finally," she said, holding it to the candlelight. She smiled. "See, that wasn't so hard." She walked to the front door. I heard the deadbolt slide open, then the chain. "You can sleep in your own bed tonight, Dad. We'll get this filed Monday morning." Xander followed her out. Their car started gravel crunching, then silence. I stood alone and allowed myself a faint smile. Vera gave me that pen 25 years ago when I was mapping reserves that would eventually produce 40 million barrels of oil. She never could have guessed that a quarter century later, it would be the first weapon I used to protect the land she loved. I carried Ren upstairs to the guest room, tucked her in under the blue quilt Vera had sewn, then went to bed and slept better than I had in 3 days. The call came at 10 the next morning. I was walking the beach when my phone rang, Sienna's name. I let it ring 4 times. "What did you do to that paper?" Her voice was high, sharp, panicked. "I signed it," I said calmly. "I don't know what you're talking about. As the signature is gone, completely gone. The notary just called. There's nothing on the page where you signed, just blank paper." I stopped walking and looked out at the Atlantic. The waves were gentle rolling in long, smooth sets. Well, that's strange, I said. Maybe the pen was running dry. Old ink does that sometimes. Don't play games with me, she hissed. I'm coming back and you're going to sign it again. The right way this time. I'm not home, I said. I'm taking a walk. She hung up. I stood on the sand for a long moment, then scrolled through my contacts and found the name I needed. Roland Stafford. I pressed the call. He answered on the second ring. Arthur, he said, his voice warm and surprised. It's been months. How are you holding up? Roland Stafford was 62, a retired Southampton police chief with a boisterous laugh and razor-sharp instincts. We'd known each other since 1989 when he'd responded to a break-in at my old house and ended up staying for coffee and talking for 3 hours about Vera's clam chowder. He understood criminals better than anyone I'd ever met. Roland, I said, cutting through the pleasantries. I need to talk to you about Sienna. The warmth in his voice shifted immediately. I heard him moving a door closing. I talk, he said. I told him everything. The folder, the deed of gift, the slap, the locked door, Wren crying, the disappearing ink. I kept my voice steady and factual. When I finished, Roland was silent for 5 full seconds. Arthur, he said finally, and his voice wasn't the voice of a worried friend anymore. It was something colder. She's going to come back, and this time it will be different. Different how? She won't use paperwork anymore, he said. The legal route failed, so she's going to escalate. She's going to use you, your health, your age, your isolation. Do you want me in? I stared out at the ocean, watching a fishing boat work along the horizon. Get in, I said. Good. Don't sign anything else. Don't let her in the house. And start documenting everything, dates, times, who said what. If she tries to claim you're incompetent or a danger to yourself, we need a paper trail that proves otherwise. She already thinks I'm old and confused, I said. And then we use that, Roland said. Let her think she's smarter than you. Let her think you're weak, and we'll build the case while she digs herself deeper. For the first time in 3 days, I felt the weight begin to shift. Not off my shoulders, but onto hers. Yeah, thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Roland replied. This is just starting. She's going to come at you from angles you haven't thought of. That's what desperate people do. I hung up and stood on the beach watching the waves. Roland's voice over the line hadn't been the voice of a worried friend. It was the voice of a man who has seen this play before and is already figuring out where to position the trap. She's going to use you, he'd said. I stared out at the vast Atlantic and realized I was facing something far more methodical than a desperate daughter. The question was, what would Tier 2 look like? Roland said she was going to use me, and walking back toward the house that morning, I understood exactly how I had spent 32 years teaching her that she could. The estate sat on the cliff exactly as it had for 3 decades, weathered timber walls, gray from salt spray windows, reflecting the October sun. I'd built this house with Vera in 1993. We'd chosen every beam, every stone in the foundation, every angle of the deck to catch the afternoon light. And standing there looking at it, I saw something else stacked inside those walls, like geological sediment, every dollar I'd ever given my daughter. Columbia Law School, $220,000 paid in full from my savings account over 3 years. I remembered the pride I felt writing those checks, knowing my daughter was going to be an attorney, that she'd have the career and stability Vera and I had worked so hard to build for ourselves. Then the Manhattan apartment, $8,500 a month for 18 months after she graduated. I'd covered it completely while she found her footing at the firm, while she built her client base, while she learned to navigate the pressure of corporate law. $153,000 total, and I'd been happy to do it. Then, 2019, the phone call where she'd asked for $180,000 for what she called a time-sensitive investment opportunity. I'd wired it the same day. 6 months later, when I asked how the investment was performing, she'd said it hadn't worked out, that sometimes these things happen, that it was a learning experience. It wasn't an investment. It was her first margin call. I stopped walking and stood in the driveway, feeling the weight of that realization settle into my chest. She'd been gambling with leverage since at least 2019, losing money faster than she could earn it, and I'd bailed her out without asking a single hard question. Last week during their visit, I'd found a financial statement Xander had left on the side table in the guest room. I'd glanced at it without thinking much of it at the time, but now the number came back to me with perfect clarity. Total debt load, $4.2 million. $4.2 million. I'd given Sienna everything. Education, housing, bailouts, second chances. Everything except the one thing Vera wanted me to teach her: the understanding that nothing is free forever, that money comes from work and sacrifice and discipline, not from manipulating the people who love you. I had spent 30 years confusing generosity with wisdom. They are not the same thing. One gives without asking why. The other asks first and sometimes says no. But starting today, I would learn to do both, even if it was decades too late. I walked inside, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where Sienna had slapped me 3 nights ago. The house felt different now, quieter, like it was waiting for something. 3 days later, on October 2nd, my phone rang. Sienna's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," she said, and her voice was breaking. Tears or something, designed to sound like tears. "Dad, I need to talk to you." I said nothing, just waited. "I've been under so much pressure," she continued. It's been brutal. And Xander and we're not doing well. The marriage is falling apart. I feel like I'm drowning, and I just want to come home." Still, I waited. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I was wrong about the paperwork. I was desperate and I made a terrible mistake. But I want to make it right. I want to come home and take care of you. You shouldn't be alone in that big house. Let me come home, Dad. Please." I looked out the window at the ocean. The waves were building a storm system moving in from the northeast. The kind of weather Vera used to love, dramatic, powerful, honest about what it was. I understood what this was. This was Tier 2. The legal route had failed, so now came the emotional manipulation. The prodigal daughter returning home contrite and tearful, positioning herself inside my house, where she could control the narrative, control access, control me. Roland had warned me, "She's going to use you, your health, your age, your isolation." And I was about to let her do exactly that. "All right," I said, my voice calm and measured. "Your old room is still exactly as you left it." Sienna's breath caught. "Really, you mean it?" "Yes," I said. "Come home, Sienna. We'll figure this out together." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Dad. I'll be there tomorrow. Is that okay?" "Tomorrow is fine," I said. I hung up and set the phone on the table. In geology, we call it exploratory drilling. You don't guess where the pressure is building underground, where the fault lines are forming, where the reserves are hiding. You position the drill bit over the most promising coordinates and let it sink deep into the earth, reading the resistance. The density changes the chemical signatures in the extracted core samples. You let the stratum reveal itself. Sienna thought she was moving in to finish what she started. She thought she was positioning herself to execute the next phase of her plan, whatever that plan was. She had no idea I was about to turn my own house into a laboratory, and she was the specimen under observation. But there was one thing I needed to know first: exactly how far she was willing to go. What came after the locked doors and the forged deeds? What Tier 3 looked like, and Tier 4, and however many tiers this conspiracy had built into its architecture. I stood by the window watching the late afternoon light cut across the Atlantic, and thought about Roland's voice on the phone that morning. "Let her think she's smarter than you. Let her think you're weak, and we'll build the case while she digs herself deeper." I wasn't weak, I wasn't confused, and I wasn't going to roll over and let my daughter steal the house Vera and I built. But I was going to let her think all those things. I was going to let the drill bit sink deep, and I was going to watch very carefully what came up in the core sample. Sienna was moving in tomorrow, and I wouldn't have to wait long to find out exactly how far she was willing to go. The heavy thud of suitcases scraping up the wooden stairs told me the laboratory was now live. My daughter and son-in-law moving into the second floor, believing they held every advantage. They arrived on the afternoon of October 3rd. 3 suitcases, 2 boxes, and Wren carrying her rag doll. Sienna hugged me at the door, holding on just a fraction too long. "Thank you for this, Dad," she whispered. "I promise I'll make it right." Xander carried the boxes upstairs without eye contact. I watched him disappear into the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. That night, I brought spare towels up to the second floor. The hallway was dim lit only by the yellow sconce light. I could hear Wren's voice from Sienna's room, reading aloud from a picture book. I passed Xander's door. It was cracked open 3 inches. I glanced inside and saw him hunched over his phone, typing frantically. The screen was bright in the dark room. I caught the text message before he noticed me. "Elise, 8 p.m. Tonight impossible. She's watching." Xander looked up. Our eyes met. For one long second, neither of us moved. Then he flipped the phone face down his face, going white. I kept walking and knocked softly on his door frame. "Extra towels," I said calmly. "And extra blankets are in the hallway closet if you need them." "Yeah, thanks." Xander said, his voice tight. I handed him the towels and walked back downstairs. Eliza. I didn't know who she was or what she had to do with Sienna's desperation. But I knew one thing. Whatever secret a man panics to hide is usually the exact thing he cannot afford to lose. And Xander's face when I caught him wasn't just embarrassment. It was fear. I filed the name away. Another variable in an equation I was still solving. I've drilled thousands of exploratory wells in my career, and the most important skill isn't knowing where to drill. It's knowing how to read what the drill bit brings back to the surface. You don't jump to conclusions. You collect the data. You log the samples. You wait for the pattern to reveal itself. 3 days later, on the morning of October 5th, the drill bit brought something to the surface I hadn't wanted to find. I'd been awake since 5 that morning, not from insomnia, but from preparation. 2 days earlier, I'd taken a small convex mirror from my geological survey kit, the kind we use to observe cave roof stability, without climbing scaffolding, and placed it on the kitchen spice rack, angled to reflect the coffee counter. From my seat at the kitchen table, I could see the entire counter in the curved reflection, without anyone knowing they were being watched. At 6:45, Sienna came downstairs in her bathrobe. She didn't see me sitting in the breakfast nook with the newspaper. She went straight to the coffee maker, filled my usual mug, the blue ceramic one Vera had bought me, and set it on the counter. Then she opened her bathrobe pocket and pulled out a pill bottle. I watched in the convex mirror as she shook out a single white pill, set it on the cutting board, and crushed it with the back of a spoon. Then she scraped the powder into the coffee and stirred it, tapping the spoon against the rim 3 times before rinsing it. She turned, saw me in the breakfast nook, and smiled. "Good morning, Dad," she said brightly, walking over with the mug. "I made it just the way you like it." I looked up from the newspaper and smiled back. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I accepted the mug, wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, brought it close as if to drink, then set it down. "I'll let it cool for a minute," I said. "Too hot right now." Sienna nodded and walked onto the deck, her phone already in her hand. I waited until I heard the deck door slide shut. Then I stood, carried the mug to the sink, and poured the entire contents into the potted succulent plant on the windowsill. I rinsed the mug once, then took a butter knife and carefully scraped the residue from the bottom into a small plastic zip bag, the exact type I'd used to collect soil samples in West Texas, the kind that seals airtight and preserves chemical composition. I sealed the bag, slipped it into a brown manila envelope, and addressed it to Roland's home address. Nothing unusual, just an old man mailing a letter. My own daughter had just tried to poison me in my own kitchen, and I had collected the evidence with the same steady hands I'd used to map underground oil reserves for 3 decades. I walked to my study and wrote a short note to include with the sample. "Roland, this is what Sienna put in my coffee this morning, October 5th, 6:45 a.m. I need to know what it is and what it does. Don't call the house line. She might be listening. Arthur." I folded the note, sealed it in the envelope with the sample bag, and set it by the front door for the morning mail carrier. Inside that small plastic bag was proof of criminal assault. I didn't know what the drug was yet, though I would learn later it was quetiapine, a powerful antipsychotic never prescribed to me, designed to induce cognitive confusion and memory loss. But the evidence was only half the equation. The other half was understanding exactly what Sienna planned to do with a father she was systematically making appear mentally incompetent. I stood by the window and watched my daughter on the deck phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone in a voice too low for me to hear. And I wouldn't have to wait long for Roland's analysis. Roland's voice came through my phone at exactly 9:47 on the morning of October 7th. Not a text, but a direct call, and the way he said my name told me the sample had revealed something worse than I'd imagined. "Arthur," he said, "I need you to meet me, right now, Southampton Stop and Shop. Parking lot, far corner near the loading dock. Don't tell anyone where you're going." I drove there in silence, gripping the steering wheel and watching the October trees blur past. When I pulled into the lot, Roland was already there leaning against his truck, arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept. I parked and walked over. "What did you find?" I asked. Roland pulled a folded lab report from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. "Quetiapine," he said. 400 milligrams, never prescribed to you, completely absent from your medical history. This is elder abuse under New York Penal Law, Section 260.32, aggravated because of the systematic nature and the financial motive. I stared at the paper. The chemical name meant nothing to me, but the dosage numbers and the red-flagged warnings did. "What does it do?" I asked. It's an antipsychotic, Roland said. High doses cause severe cognitive decline, lethargy, disorientation, memory loss. Within 6 to 8 weeks of regular dosing, you'd be exhibiting symptoms consistent with dementia or neurological disease. Perfect for a guardianship petition. I folded the paper and handed it back to him. You said you needed me to meet you right now, I said. That means there's more. Roland nodded. I logged the sample with Suffolk County PD the day I got it, he said. Clean chain of custody from the moment you mailed it. Detective Sergeant Lyle Redmond is handling it. He's 44, been with the department 16 years, built his career on patience and thorough evidence chains. He recognized a winnable case the moment I brought him your sample. And the FBI field office in Melville is in, Roland said. This has federal wire fraud written all over it. If Sienna's planning to use a fraudulent guardianship to access your assets or transfer property that's interstate commerce federal jurisdiction, Redmond made the call yesterday. You're not dealing with a family dispute anymore, Arthur. You're at the center of a federal criminal investigation. The FBI, federal agents were now watching my daughter the same way she thought she was watching me. I drove back home with my hands perfectly steady on the steering wheel. What do I do? I asked. Roland's expression was dead serious. Act completely normal, he said. Let Sienna wire her own trap. Every dose she gives you, every lie she tells, every camera she hides, it's all evidence now. We need her to commit fully. We need documentation. We need a pattern so clear that no defense attorney can argue coincidence or mistake. How long? As long as it takes, Roland said. Weeks maybe. Can you do that? I thought of Vera. I thought of Wren. I thought of the house on the cliff that Sienna was trying to steal. Yes, I said. 2 days later, on the morning of October 9th, Sienna and Xander drove to Southampton to shop for groceries. I watched their car disappear down the gravel drive, then walked to my study and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was an RF signal analyzer radio frequency detector, the same device I'd used during geological site surveys to locate buried metallic pipes and underground cables by tracking electromagnetic emissions. I'd bought it in 1997, and it still worked perfectly. I turned it on and started in the living room. The detector chirped immediately near the wall clock, a steady pulsing beep that indicated an active transmission signal. I stood on a chair and examined the clock face. There behind the number 6 was a pinhole no bigger than a pencil tip, a camera lens. I moved to the hallway. The detector went off again near the electrical outlet halfway down the corridor. I unscrewed the faceplate carefully. Another camera disguised as a screw head. Bedroom. The detector led me to the picture frame on my dresser, the one holding a photo of Vera and me from 1995, standing on this same beach. Camera hidden in the frame's decorative corner. Study, the desk lamp. Camera in the base angled to capture anyone sitting at the desk. 4 cameras total. She'd been watching me for days, maybe weeks, recording every movement, every conversation, every moment I thought I was alone in my own house. I stood in the study holding the RF detector and felt a cold fury settle into my chest. Then I made a decision. I left every single camera exactly where it was. In geology, we call it controlled detonation. You don't try to stop the explosion, you just make absolutely certain it goes off exactly where and when you want it to. Sienna wanted video proof that I was losing my mind. I was more than happy to give her a show. Over the next 3 days, I performed. I walked past the hallway camera and stumbled slightly, catching myself on the wall. I stood in the living room staring at the ocean and called out, Vera, where did you put the car keys? And deuaf and Willemikens. I picked up the television remote and studied it like I'd never seen one before, then set it down on the kitchen counter instead of the coffee table. I called the coffee maker a toaster. I wore mismatched socks. Every performance was calculated, every stumble choreographed. I gave Sienna exactly what she needed for her guardianship petition footage of a confused, declining old man who couldn't be trusted to manage his own affairs. But I controlled every frame. I chose which rooms to perform, in which times of day, which specific behaviors would read as cognitive decline to a psychiatrist reviewing the footage later. And critically, I made sure the cameras never caught me in the moments that mattered. The moments when I poured her poison coffee into the plant. The moments when I used the RF detector. The moments when I sat at this desk completely lucid writing detailed notes for Roland and Detective Redmond. Sienna thought she was directing a documentary about my mental collapse. She had no idea I was the one choosing which scenes made the final cut. The question was, what else was she planning that I hadn't discovered yet? I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. What else Sienna was planning revealed itself through the most innocent voice in the house, my granddaughter humming a playground song in the living room while clutching the rag doll that contained a voice recorder I'd installed 3 weeks ago. Wren came to stay for the weekend on Saturday, October 12th. She was 8 years old, and she trusted everyone, which broke my heart in ways I couldn't name. She sat on the living room floor that evening at dusk, braiding the doll's yarn hair and singing softly to herself while I washed dishes in the adjacent kitchen. I'd modified that doll on September 20th, before any of this started. Wren had left it on her last visit 2 summers ago, before the silence began, and I'd kept it on the guest room shelf waiting for her return. When Sienna called to say they were coming, I had 1 week. That was enough time to be cautious. A high-end voice recorder and mini GPS tracker, both embedded in the stuffing, where Wren would never notice the extra weight. The battery lasted 72 hours per charge, and I'd been recharging it every time Wren visited downloading the audio files to my laptop late at night in my workshop. Most of the recordings were nothing. Wren singing, Wren talking to the doll, background noise from whatever room she'd left it in. But that night, the doll captured something different. I was scrubbing a pan when I heard Sienna's voice from the kitchen alcove just around the corner from where I stood. She was whispering, but the doll was maybe 8 feet away on the living room floor, and the recorder was sensitive enough to pick up conversations through walls. "What day is Dr. Harrington coming?" Xander's voice nervous and low. "Wednesday," Sienna said. "He says 3 more weeks of video footage will be enough to file the Article 81 petition." My hands went still in the soapy water. "And you're sure he'll testify?" Xander asked. "He's done this before," Sienna said. "He knows exactly what to say. Dad will never see it coming." I heard footsteps. They were moving away back toward the stairs. I kept washing the pan, my movements slow and steady, until I heard their bedroom door close upstairs. Then I dried my hands and walked into the living room, where Wren was tucking the doll into a shoebox she'd turned into a bed. "Time for your bath, sweetheart," I said, my voice perfectly calm. That night, after Wren was asleep and the house was dark, I sat alone in my workshop and played back the recording through headphones. Article 81. I knew that specific section of New York mental hygiene law. Back in 2019, an old colleague of mine on Long Island, a structural engineer named Bill Hendricks, was stripped of everything by his son using that exact statute. Bill wasn't prepared. He didn't know what was happening until a judge's signature made his 34-year-old son his legal guardian, controlling every dollar, every medical decision, every choice about where he lived and who he saw. Bill died in a nursing home 18 months later. His son sold the house 3 weeks after the funeral. Article 81, a legal proceeding designed to protect vulnerable elders from exploitation. And my daughter was going to weaponize it to become my legal guardian, controlling every dollar, every medical decision, every breath I took. I sat in the dark workshop long after the recording cut, to static understanding the endgame completely. 4 days later, on Wednesday, October the 16th, at exactly 10 in the morning, Dr. Brennan Harrington arrived. Sienna had mentioned it the night before at dinner, her voice carefully concerned. "Dad, I arranged for a doctor to stop by tomorrow, just a routine checkup. You've seemed a little off lately, and I want to make sure everything's okay." I'd nodded and said, "That's thoughtful of you, sweetheart." Harrington was 48 according to the business card he handed me, a psychiatrist. He wore a charcoal suit and a watch that caught the morning light coming through the living room windows, a Patek Philippe platinum case, probably $40,000 on his wrist. Not the timepiece of an average medical practitioner. I filed that detail away. "Mr. Gallagher," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but brief. "I'm Dr. Harrington. Your daughter asked me to stop by for a routine cognitive assessment. Nothing to worry about." "Of course," I said. "Would you like some coffee, Thalsa?" "No, thank you," he said, sitting down on the sofa and pulling a clipboard from his leather bag. "This won't take long, just a few simple questions." The mini mental state examination. 30 questions scored out of 30 points. Standard screening tool for dementia and cognitive impairment. I'd researched it thoroughly the day after I discovered the hidden cameras. Harrington asked me what year it was. I answered correctly. What season? Correct. What state we were in? Correct. He showed me 3 objects, a pen, a watch, a key, and asked me to remember them. I repeated them back. Then he asked me to spell world backwards. I hesitated deliberately, then said DLROW. Wrong. 1 point deducted. He asked me to count backwards from 100 by sevens. I said 93, 86, 78. Wrong. Another point deducted. In field geology, when you need to understand a formation's weakness, you don't destroy the sample, you let it reveal itself under controlled pressure. Harrington needed evidence of impairment. I was going to give him exactly enough to make his report convincing, but not enough to trigger immediate emergency intervention. By the end of the exam, I had intentionally missed exactly 6 questions out of 30, a score of 24, just below the clinical threshold of normal cognitive function, just enough to flag concern, just enough to justify further evaluation and, eventually, a guardianship petition. Harrington made notes on his clipboard, then looked up at Sienna, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner the entire time. He gave her a subtle nod. She nodded back. "Well, Mr. Gallagher," Harrington said, standing and tucking the clipboard back into his bag. "I think we're done here. I'll send my findings to your daughter in the next few days." "Thank you, doctor," I said. He left. Sienna walked him to the door, their voices too low for me to hear. When she came back, she sat down next to me and put her hand on mine. "Are you all right, Dad?" she asked softly. I looked at her and said, "I'm just a little tired." It was the only true statement I had told my daughter in weeks. Everything else was theater. But now I knew the script, 3 more weeks of footage, then a courtroom, then a judge's signature that would hand my entire life to the woman who had slapped me in front of my granddaughter. Unless Roland found what I suspected he would find about Dr. Brennan Harrington's past. Roland found what I'd suspected he would find about Dr. Harrington, and the call came early 6:15 on a Friday morning, while I was running sandpaper over an old geological drill bit in my workshop, a comforting habit when I needed to think. My phone vibrated on the workbench. Roland's number. I answered on the first ring. "Tell me," I said. "Dr. Brennan Harrington, N.D." Roland said, his voice clipped and precise. "New York medical license number 087234. Investigated in 2019 by Nassau County DA for guardianship fraud. Elderly victim's family suspected fabricated diagnoses. Case collapse, lack of cooperative witnesses before trial." I set down the sandpaper and listened. 2021, Roland continued. Suffolk County, same pattern. Article 81, petition questionable, psychiatric evaluation, sudden cognitive decline that didn't match prior medical records. But the victim died 3 weeks before proceedings could advance. No one left to testify. "And now he's here," I said. "And now he's here," Roland confirmed. 3rd time. The FBI just added him to the active joint case file with Detective Redmond. "Arthur, this establishes pattern of conduct. That's a massive asset for criminal prosecution. It transforms this from an isolated incident into serial fraud." I looked out the workshop window at the gray October sky. "What's your assessment?" I asked. Roland's voice was dead calm. "Harrington is the weakest link," he said. "He's played this game twice and escaped. The 3rd time is the charm. When the FBI knocks on his door with 2 prior investigations and your toxicology evidence, he's going to fold faster than a house of cards. And when he folds, he's going to give up everyone above him. The weakest link. In geology, we call that a fault line. You don't need to shatter the entire mountain face. You just find the fault line and apply the exact right pressure at the exact right moment. Let the structure collapse from its own internal stress." "How long?" I asked. "Redmond says they're building the case methodically," Roland said. "Another 2 weeks, maybe 3. They want everything airtight before they move. Can you hold out that long?" I thought about the cameras, the poison, the performances, the 3-week timeline Sienna had mentioned. "Yes," I said. 4 nights later, at 2 in the morning, on October 22nd, I woke to the faint creak of a floorboard in the hallway. Not the natural settling of an old house. The deliberate, careful step of someone moving like a ghost, trying not to wake anyone. I lay perfectly still in bed, listening. Another creak, closer. Then the soft click of my study door opening. I slipped out of bed silently, my bare feet making no sound on the wooden floor. The hallway was dark except for the pale moonlight coming through the window at the far end. I moved slowly, keeping to the wall, and stopped at the study doorway. Sienna was kneeling in front of my safe, a letter opener in her hand, trying to pry open the lock mechanism. I watched her for 3 full seconds before I spoke. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice calm. Sienna spun around the letter opener still in her hand. Her face in the moonlight was a mask of rage. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where's the original will?" "In the safe," I said, "where it's been for 3 years. "You're going to open it," she said, standing up, "right now." No, I said. What happened next happened fast. Sienna's hand came across my face hard enough that my reading glasses flew off and clattered onto the wooden floor. The same spot she'd hit 3 weeks ago. The same burning pain spreading across my cheekbone. But this time she didn't stop. She shoved me backward, both hands on my chest, and I went down hard onto the floor, my head barely missing the corner of the desk. "Look at yourself," she screamed, standing over me. "You're losing your mind. Tomorrow the doctor signs the papers and this estate belongs to me. Do you understand? It belongs to me." I didn't move. I lay on the floor in the darkness, my cheek throbbing, and I counted. 1, 2, 3. I looked up at the desk lamp, the one with the hidden camera Sienna had installed weeks ago. The lens was pointed directly at us, recording everything. The angle was perfect, Sienna standing over me, screaming while I lay motionless on the floor, offering no resistance, no threat, just an old man who'd been struck and shoved by his own daughter. 10, 15, 20. I counted to 63 seconds before Sienna finally stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. 63 seconds of her own camera recording me lying motionless on the floor, offering no resistance, offering no violence, just lying there bleeding from where my head had scraped the desk leg on the way down. 63 seconds of undeniable proof that this father wasn't dangerously unstable or a threat to himself or others. 63 seconds proving I was the victim of systematic assault. It was a receipt paid in physical pain, and I would cash it. I stayed on the floor for another minute after she left, then slowly got to my feet. I found my glasses unbroken this time and wiped them against my shirt. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I could see my daughter's face clearer than ever before. The rage, the desperation, the absolute certainty that she was winning. But what Sienna didn't know was that every camera she had hidden was now feeding into a system she didn't control. 3 days ago, while she and Xander were shopping in Southampton, I'd installed a small black box behind the router in the basement. A network tap that cloned every video feed to a secure cloud server at Roland's security firm. Detective Redmond had copies of everything now. The coffee poisoning on October 5th. Tonight's assault. All of it with unbroken chain of custody. And tomorrow morning, I was going to show her exactly what happens when you try to trap a geologist who has spent 30 years reading the layers that lie beneath the surface. Because I had one more countermeasure she couldn't possibly anticipate. The countermeasure Sienna couldn't anticipate required me to wait until she left the house. And on the morning of October 23rd, I stood at the upstairs window, watching her SUV disappear past the outer gates toward Southampton. The moment the engine sound faded completely, I walked down to my workshop and retrieved my laptop from the hidden floor compartment beneath the workbench. I'd built that compartment in 1994 to store field survey equipment. Now, it held something more valuable, the technical knowledge I'd accumulated over 30 years, coordinating remote sensors across geological drilling sites that spanned 3 continents. Sienna thought her camera system was sophisticated. To me, it was transparent. I opened the laptop and pulled up the network mapping software I'd used to coordinate underground seismic monitors in Alaska. The Wi-Fi router in the basement showed up immediately, a consumer-grade Netgear model broadcasting on Channel 6. Password protected but using WPA2 encryption that was 8 years out of date. I accessed the admin panel in 40 seconds. The 4 cameras appeared as connected devices: living room, clock hallway, outlet bedroom frame, study lamp. Each one streaming video to a local storage drive Sienna had hidden in the basement crawl space. She probably checked the footage every night while I slept, building her case documenting my supposed decline. What she didn't know was that I could clone the entire feed. I installed a hidden secondary uplink, a mirror protocol that duplicated every byte of video data and streamed it to a secure cloud server at Roland's security consulting firm in Southampton. The cameras would continue recording exactly as before. Sienna would see nothing different when she reviewed her footage. But now, every frame existed in 2 places simultaneously. Detective Redmond had access to the cloud server. Everything was time-stamped, encrypted, and logged with legally preserved chain of custody. The coffee poisoning on October 5th. Both physical assaults. Every stage performance of cognitive decline. all of it duplicated and stored, where Sienna could never reach it, never delete it, never claim it didn't exist. Vera used to say, I read rock strata like an open book. Sienna's camera system to me was no different a transparent layer of history writing its own indictment. And that history was now sitting in a vault she didn't even know existed. I sent an encrypted text to Roland Mirror active, chain of custody green. His reply arrived 10 seconds later. Kowalski's got the feed. We're golden. I closed the laptop, returned it to the hidden compartment, and went upstairs to make myself breakfast. When Sienna came home 2 hours later, carrying grocery bags, I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, looking like an old man with nothing better to do. 2 days later, on the afternoon of October 25th, I told Sienna I had a medical scan appointment in Stony Brook and would be gone most of the afternoon. Do you want me to drive you? She asked, her concern perfectly performed. No, I said, I can manage. I drove to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation office, a low brick building 15 miles east of the estate. Inside, a conservation officer named Brent Finch sat behind a gray metal desk, processing easement applications with bureaucratic precision. He was maybe 55, with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient expression of someone who'd seen enough family land disputes to recognize when someone was protecting something that truly mattered. I sat down across from him and slid the completed application across the desk. Whale Nose Conservation, easement, I said. 12 acres, Suffolk County. I want it permanently restricted from commercial development. Finch reviewed the paperwork carefully, flipping through each page. And this easement is permanent, Mr. Gallagher, he said. The land can never be developed commercially. You understand that no resorts, no casinos, no hotels, no subdivision. It stays exactly as it is residential only forever. I understand completely, I said. My late wife and I built that house with our own hands in 1993. It will remain exactly what it is. Finch nodded and stamped the application with a heavy red seal. I'll file this with Suffolk County Clerk's office this afternoon, he said. It'll be a searchable public record by end of business today. I drove from Stony Brook to the county clerk's office and watched Finch hand-deliver the stamped easement to the recording department. The clerk scanned it into the system while I stood at the counter. 3 minutes later, it appeared in the public database, time-stamped and indexed. Whole Nose Point Estate, permanent conservation easement. Commercial development prohibited under New York Environmental Conservation Law Section 49-0301. To anyone who has ever faced a choice between protecting what you built and letting someone take it because fighting back felt too hard, I will tell you this. The law is a tool, and tools belong to whoever learns how to use them correctly. The easement meant that any contract to sell the property for commercial development was now legally void before the ink dried. It meant that anyone who signed such a contract, anyone who tried to transfer the land to a casino developer, a resort corporation, or any commercial entity, would be committing fraud, not civil fraud, criminal fraud, documented, provable, prosecutable fraud. And if that person used forged guardianship papers to execute the sale, it became federal wire fraud the moment money moved across state lines. I had just killed the land's commercial value permanently, and I had done it in a way that was completely legal, completely public, and completely irreversible. Anyone who tried to sell this headland for a commercial resort would be committing a felony right in front of the FBI. I just had to wait for Sienna to do it. And to make sure she did, I needed to leave the front door wide open. I drove back to Whale Nose Point that afternoon and parked in my usual spot. Sienna was standing at the kitchen window, watching me return her face, unreadable. She had no idea that the land beneath her feet was now legally dead for commercial development. She had no idea that every camera she had hidden was now feeding evidence to a federal detective. All she knew was that her father had gone to the doctor and come back looking tired. And that was exactly what I wanted her to know, because the trap was set and all that remained was patience. Sienna's next move required me to give her a target she couldn't resist. And on October 28th, 3 days after filing the conservation easement, I pulled into the parking lot behind Lydia Whitfield's brick law office in Southampton and checked my rearview mirror one last time to ensure no one had followed me. Lydia Whitfield was 58. An attorney who had represented my interests since 1994 when she'd handled the first refinancing of Whale Nose Point. She arrived at her conference room Carrying a banker's box and wearing reading glasses already perched on her nose, a woman who had spent 29 years earning my absolute trust, and who answered her phone on Sundays because she understood what loyalty meant. Roland was already inside, sitting at the long wooden table with his laptop open. "Arthur," Lydia said, shaking my hand. "Roland filled me in on the broad strokes, but I want to hear it from you directly." I sat down and told her everything. The clam chowder, the forged deed, the locked door, the poison, the cameras, the slaps, the Article 81 petition. Lydia took notes in a leather-bound notebook, her handwriting precise and economical. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her reading glasses. "You've documented everything?" she asked. "Everything," I said. "Chain of custody on the toxicology sample. Video feeds cloned to Roland's secure server. The conservation easement filed and indexed." "Good," Lydia said. "Then let's build the mousetrap." Roland opened a folder on his laptop and turned the screen toward us. "Atlantic Coastal Development LLC," he said. "Delaware Registration Corporate Website Architectural Portfolio. On paper, it's a $50 million development firm specializing in luxury casino resorts on coastal headlands. In reality, it's a federal mousetrap." The website looked professional. Polished renderings of high-rise hotels, waterfront casinos, spa facilities. A management team with LinkedIn profiles and professional headshots. Press releases about previous projects in Atlantic City and the Outer Banks. This is a shell company," I said. "This is an FBI-sanctioned undercover sting operation," Roland corrected. "Watch." He clicked a button on his laptop, and a video window opened. A man in his 40s appeared on screen, wearing a dark suit and sitting in what looked like a federal office building. "Mr. Gallagher," the man said. "I'm Special Agent Torres, FBI Field Office in Melville. Roland briefed me on your situation. I want to confirm that Atlantic Coastal Development, LLC, is now logged as an authorized Bureau undercover operation under my direct supervision. This eliminates any entrapment defense your daughter has already demonstrated independent criminal intent through the poisoning assaults and fraudulent deed attempt. If she moves forward with a property sale using forged guardianship papers, she's doing so of her own volition." "Thank you," I said. Torres nodded and the video feed ended. To anyone listening who has ever been told that fighting back against family means you're cruel or vindictive, let me tell you something. The law doesn't care about your last name. It cares about the truth, and the truth has a chain of custody. Lydia pulled 3 stapled documents from her banker's box and spread them across the table. "Here's the legal architecture," she said. "The moment Sienna executes a contract with Atlantic Coastal using fraudulent guardianship papers, she commits 3 separate federal felonies simultaneously." She pointed to the first document, Federal Wire Fraud under Title 18, Section 1343. The sale contract will require electronic transfer of funds across state lines. That's wire fraud the moment she signs. Second document, Judicial Forgery and Fraud on the Court. She's using a guardianship petition based on fabricated evidence and a corrupt psychiatrist to claim legal authority she doesn't possess. Third document, Commercial Fraud and Material Misrepresentation. The conservation easement you filed makes the land legally incapable of commercial development. Any sale contract claiming the property can be developed for casino use is fraudulent on its face. She's selling something that legally cannot exist. Lydia looked up at me. "Arthur, the conservation easement was brilliant," she said. "She can't sell what she doesn't have the right to sell. And even if she somehow gets guardianship, the easement survives. It's permanent. It's on the public record. Anyone who signs a commercial development contract is committing fraud against the buyer." "And Sienna will sign it," I said. "She'll sign it," Roland confirmed. "Because my undercover operative is going to offer her $18 million, 20% above market value for immediate resort development. A woman drowning in $4.2 million of debt isn't going to ask hard questions when salvation shows up with a premium offer." In 30 years of field geology, the moment before a major strike always felt the same, a particular quality of silence in the data, a convergence of indicators pointing at one inevitable conclusion. This was that moment. This time, I was drilling into human greed, and I've never been more certain of a strike. We worked until almost 7 that evening, finalizing every detail. The LinkedIn profile of Roland's undercover operative, a polished professional headshot. a convincing employment history at legitimate development firms, the precise wording of the initial contact message, the $18 million offer structured with a $5 million wire deposit to trigger immediate federal jurisdiction. Lydia drafted the FBI cooperation agreement, the document that formalized my role as a cooperating witness and protected me from any accessory liability. Roland finalized the Atlantic Coastal website, complete with a contact form that would route directly to his secure server. At 6:45, Lydia looked up from the final documents and asked, "Arthur, are you absolutely sure about this? Once we set this in motion, there's no stopping it. When the FBI moves, they move fast. Your daughter is going to federal prison." I looked out her office window at the darkening Southampton streets and answered without hesitation. "I am absolutely sure," I said. She watched her husband strike her father and asked me why I was being difficult. "I am absolutely sure." Lydia nodded and closed the banker's box. All that remained was the execution. The execution began exactly 1 week later, on November 4th, in the most ordinary way possible, with the soft chime of a laptop notification and the blue glow of a screen reflecting off my daughter's face in a way that looked entirely different from every other night. This was the glow of someone who thinks their salvation has finally arrived. Sienna was sitting across the kitchen island from me, her laptop open working through what she'd told me were client files from her Manhattan law firm. I was reading the newspaper, or pretending to read it, while actually watching her in my peripheral vision, the way I'd learned to do over the past month. The notification chimed at 7:32. I watched her eyes flick to the screen, then they stopped. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. Her entire body went still, in a way that told me this wasn't another email about a court filing or a client meeting. She clicked on something. I couldn't see the screen from my angle, but I could see her face. The way her lips parted slightly. The way she leaned forward reading something twice, then 3 times. I'd seen that look before in oil field negotiations, when a desperate landowner received an offer they couldn't refuse. The moment when someone realizes the number on the page is exactly what they need it to be, and caution becomes an obstacle they can no longer afford. Sienna's fingers started moving again. Not the careful, deliberate typing of an attorney reviewing a contract. The rapid, almost frantic typing of someone composing a response before the opportunity disappears. 2 hours later, at 9:38, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Roland. "Check your email," she replied. I excused myself to the bathroom and opened my phone. Roland had forwarded me Sienna's response to Atlantic Coastal's LinkedIn message. "Thank you for reaching out. This opportunity aligns perfectly with our family's estate planning timeline. I would welcome an in-person discussion at your earliest convenience." 2 hours. That's how long it took her to reply to a stranger offering $18 million for property she didn't own, couldn't legally sell, and had never mentioned to me she was considering selling. I had waited 3 years for her to come home for a single dinner. I suppose that is the difference between a person hunted by their debts and a man protected by his patience. At 10:47 that night, after Sienna had gone upstairs and the house was dark, Roland called. She took the bait," he said without preamble. "Hook, line, and sinker. She's demanding an in-person meeting next week." "Next week," I repeated. "November 10th, Roland said. My operative suggested lunch at a Manhattan steakhouse. Neutral territory, professional atmosphere. She accepted immediately. "And the FBI?" "Recording everything," Roland said. "Every email, every LinkedIn message, every phone call. The moment she signs a contract using fraudulent guardianship papers, it's federal wire fraud with a perfect evidence chain." I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, looking out at the black Atlantic and thinking about Vera. 2 days later, on the morning of November 6th, I opened my mail in the workshop and found a crisp white envelope bearing the stamp of the Suffolk County Supreme Court. It felt abnormally heavy in my hands. Inside was an emergency order for an Article 81 guardianship hearing under New York mental hygiene law filed by Dr. Brennan Harrington, and petitioning that Sienna Gallagher be appointed the sole guardian of both the person and property of Arthur Gallagher. The language was clinical and devastating. Due to documented severe progressive cognitive decay, memory loss, and financial incompetence posing immediate danger to himself and his estate, the court is respectfully petitioned to appoint emergency guardianship with full authority over medical decisions, financial transactions, and residential placement. Attached as exhibits were 3 video clips printed as still frames on the legal documents. I recognized each one immediately because I'd performed them deliberately. Exhibit A, me stumbling in the hallway, catching myself on the wall. Exhibit B, me standing in the living room calling out, "Vera, where did you put the car keys?" Exhibit C, me holding a coffee cup staring at it like I'd forgotten what it was. The court date was set for Wednesday, November 20th, 2023, 14 days away. I sat in the workshop, silence looking at those 3 stills printed on crisp legal paper, and realized how damning my own choreographed performances looked to an outside judge who didn't know I was starring in a movie with a hidden director. I had given Sienna the exact footage she wanted. Now I just had to trust that Lydia could show the court what cameras see and what cameras hide, and the difference between a man losing his mind and a man executing a plan. The video clips were heavily edited. No timestamps, no context, just 3 isolated moments that, when presented in sequence, told a story of a man in decline. What they didn't show was the morning of October 5th when Sienna crushed a pill into my coffee while I watched in a convex mirror. What they didn't show was the night of October 22nd when she struck me across the face and shoved me to the floor while her own camera recorded every second. What they didn't show was me sitting in my workshop at midnight, completely lucid writing detailed notes for Roland and Detective Redmond. The edited footage was a lie built on a foundation of truth, and I had the unedited version stored on a server Sienna didn't know existed. I set the court documents down on my workbench and stared at the 3 video stills one more time. 14 days until the hearing. 14 days for Lydia to counter a petition backed by a corrupt psychiatrist, edited surveillance footage, and a daughter willing to commit perjury in open court. But I had something Dr. Harrington and Sienna didn't know. Existed the unedited footage showing exactly who was poisoning whom, who was striking whom, who was the predator, and who was the prey. And I had something even more valuable than evidence. I had Vera's strategy. Vera's strategy wasn't written in a document or hidden in a safe deposit box. It was written in time itself, 3 years between her death and Sienna's 35th birthday, 3 years for her to choose patience over greed. And on November 8th, Roland forced me to admit that out loud. He arrived at my workshop with his headlights cut, slipping through the back trail we'd been using for weeks. The first thing he did was spread a master timeline across my workbench, every piece of evidence we'd collected, every countermeasure I'd deployed, every trap we'd set. Then he looked up at me and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Yes, Arthur, when did you actually start planning this?" I didn't answer immediately. I stood there looking at the timeline, the disappearing ink, the hidden mirror, the modified doll, the conservation easement, the camera hack. Roland pressed. "You didn't build a defense this flawless on sudden intuition after she slapped you on September 29th. This level of preparation took years. When did you know?" I sat down on the workshop stool and told him the truth I'd been carrying alone. "The day Vera asked me to sign that codicil in the hospital," I said. "Spring of 2020, 6 months before she died." Roland's expression didn't change, but I saw understanding settle into his eyes. "She knew," I continued. "She knew exactly who Sienna was. She'd known since Sienna was 4 years old and started hiding candy behind her pillow instead of sharing it with the other kids at daycare. Vera watched our daughter grow into someone who wanted things more than she wanted people." "The conditional inheritance," Roland said quietly, "wasn't just legal protection," I finished. "It was time, a buffer, 3 years for Sienna to see which path she would choose, patience or greed. 36 dinners, once a month. That's all Vera asked for. And if Sienna chose to wait to show up to be present, she would have inherited everything at 35 without lifting a finger." Roland looked down at the timeline again. "But if she didn't choose patience," he said. "Then Vera had already drawn the map," I said. "She didn't leave me a set of instructions. She left me calculated time and a piece of land she had measured every inch of to protect us. And if Sienna chose darkness, Vera knew I would need that map to guide her back out. Vera knew. She didn't leave me a blueprint to follow. She left me a buffer of time and a piece of land she had calculated every inch of to protect us. I wasn't the mastermind. I was just the engineer executing her strategy." Roland stared at me across the workbench for a long moment. "Vera was the smartest person in any room she ever walked into," he said finally. "Even from a hospital bed." "Yes," I said, "she was. Before I tell you what the doll recorded 4 nights later, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think Sienna will back down when she realizes she's caught, or B, if you think she'll dig deeper. Add one short reason so I can see how you're reading this. A quick note: what follows includes some recreated details for storytelling purposes, but the lesson is what matters. 4 nights later, on November 12th, I was sitting in my workshop at 11:45 p.m. listening to the daily audio logs from Ren's doll through my headphones. Most of it was background noise, Ren singing, the television, Sienna and Xander talking about groceries or Ren's school schedule. But then I heard a voice that made me sit bolt upright. Dr. Harrington. On the phone with Sienna, I secured an advance copy of the temporary letters of guardianship. Harrington said, his voice clear and confident. The judge's signature is already on it. You can use it this week before the formal hearing even begins. Sienna's voice, is it legally active? Oh, for stake Harrington. On paper, yes. We just need to move before anyone double-checks the clerk's file. Once you have those letters in hand, you have immediate authority over his finances, his medical decisions, everything. The November 20th hearing becomes a formality. I stopped the recording and replayed it 3 times. Forging a judge's signature on official Supreme Court guardianship documents. That wasn't medical malpractice or civil fraud. That was forgery of a judicial instrument under New York Penal Law Section 170.2(5), a Class D felony. Harrington had just jumped headfirst from medical fraud into institutional forgery, and Sienna had just agreed to weaponize it. Sometimes the best thing an engineer can do is step back and let gravity do the work. I called Roland. He answered on the first ring. I need you to patch in Redmond and Torres, I said. Right now. 2 minutes later, all 4 of us were on a secure 3-way line. I played the recording. When it finished, there was silence for 5 full seconds. Then Roland's voice ice cold. Arthur, don't move a muscle. Let them use that paper. They just upgraded their sentence from a civil dispute to a federal felony. Detective Redmond, forging a judge's signature, that's institutional forgery. That's mandatory prison time, even with a plea deal. Special Agent Torres. We'll document everything. The moment she uses that forged paper to access his accounts or sign contracts, we have her on federal wire fraud and judicial forgery simultaneously. How long do we wait? I asked. 8 days, Torres said. Until the November 20th hearing. Let them commit fully. Let them think they're winning. Then we bring the hammer down. I hung up and took off my headphones. The recording was still playing on loop in the background. Harrington's voice. Sienna's agreement. The sound of 2 people digging their own graves with confidence and precision. 8 days until the hearing. 8 days for them to use that forged paper and seal their own fate. And I knew exactly when they would use it. They would use the forged document within 8 days, and on the morning of November 14th, 6 days before the hearing, I stood in the master bathroom mirror at 6:30, practicing the facial twitch that would sell the performance. Left eye first, then the corner of my mouth, until the movements looked involuntary instead of rehearsed. Dr. Harrington arrived at 10 o'clock with 2 witnesses. I was waiting in the library wearing mismatched socks and yesterday's shirt deliberate costume choices that Sienna had noticed but said nothing about. When Harrington walked in, I looked up from the newspaper I'd been pretending to read and smiled. Dr. Henderson. I said, standing to shake his hand deliberately, wrong, the kind of small confusion that reads as senility to someone watching for it. Have we met before? Harrington's expression shifted to professional concern. It's Harrington Arthur, he said gently. We've known each other for years. I was here 2 weeks ago, remember? I frowned as if trying to recall, then nodded uncertainly. Of course, I said. I'm sorry. Sometimes the days, they run together. Harrington introduced the 2 witnesses, a notary public named Sarah Mitchell and a court observer named Dennis Horvath. Both were there to validate my mental state for the guardianship petition. Both were professionals trained to detect malingering. I gave them my best confused but trying to cooperate expression. The examination began. Harrington asked me what year it was. I said 2023 correct. What season? Fall correct. What state we were in? New York correct. Then I asked, where's Ren? She was just here. She's supposed to help me with the thing. Sienna stepped forward, her hand gentle on my shoulder. Ren is at school. Dad, she said. It's Tuesday morning. I looked at her then, at the window, as if trying to orient myself. During the signing, Harrington leaned forward to hand me the documents, and I caught the scent of his cologne bergamot and cedar, expensive and cloying. The smell triggered a visceral flash of memory Ren's 8th birthday party 3 months ago before any of this started. I'd been carrying the cake from the kitchen and seen Sienna standing alone by the garden wall on her phone, her face tight with stress I hadn't understood at the time. The twitch in my eye became real for 3 seconds before I forced myself back into character. Harrington asked me to read the documents, and I picked up the first page, squinted at it, then complained, "The words, they swim together. I can't." "That's all right," Harrington said. "Your daughter can read them to you." Sienna took the page and read aloud, her voice steady and caring. I watched the witnesses watching me. Mitchell was taking notes. Horvath was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, observing. I let the twitch appear at perfect intervals, every 47 seconds like I'd practiced. When it came time to sign, I pulled out my fountain pen, the same one I'd used before with Vera's disappearing ink, and held it over the signature line. "Did I do it right?" I asked after signing, staring at my own hand. "I can't remember if I already signed." Horvath whispered something to Mitchell. I caught the words textbook vascular dementia progression. Harrington suggested a follow-up evaluation. Sienna nodded and mentioned as if it had just occurred to her that she was scheduling a signing at Atlantic Coastal Bank next week during one of my better windows, just to have clean documentation. The witnesses exchanged glances. They were convinced, completely convinced they were watching a man lose his mind. By 11:15, they were gone. I watched from the library window as Harrington's Mercedes disappeared down the drive. Then I walked to my study, where Ren's doll sat on the desk, its tiny recording light blinking green. I locked the door, put on my headphones, and pressed play. The recording had been running all morning. Most of it was background noise, footsteps, doors, closing, the murmur of Harrington's voice in the library. Then at 10:47 a.m. I heard Xander. He was in another room, his voice low and strained. "Elise, I can't do this anymore. He looked me right in the eye this morning, and I swear he knows." Elise Sinclair, the mistress whose name I'd seen on his phone weeks ago. "You're paranoid," Elise said, her voice crackling through the phone speaker. "The evaluator just confirmed he's declining. Everything is going exactly as planned." "What if it's not?" Xander said. "What if he's playing us? I made copies, Elise. Everything. Nathan's emails, the offshore accounts, all of it." I stopped the recording and checked the timestamp. 10:47 a.m. Exactly the moment I'd been signing those documents downstairs with disappearing ink, performing my confusion for the witnesses. Xander hadn't been in the room. He'd slipped away during the performance, hiding somewhere else in the house to make this panicked call, which meant Xander was already cracking before he'd even seen the signing's conclusion. The timeline revealed his terror had been building independently, not in response to my performance. I pressed play again. "It's Jesus Christ, Xander," Elise said. Somewhere safe," Xander said. "Somewhere they'll never find it. If this goes sideways, I'm not going down alone. If I go down, everyone goes down." There it is, I thought. The crack in the foundation. Xander had created his own insurance policy. Hidden evidence, copies of emails, offshore account records, proof of the conspiracy's origins. He wasn't just a co-conspirator anymore. He was a terrified accomplice sitting on a cache of proof, ready to trade it for immunity the moment things collapsed. I replayed the audio 3 times, taking detailed notes. Then I saved the file to an encrypted backup and texted Detective Redmond need to meet. "Tomorrow morning. I have something that changes everything." I stood and walked to the window overlooking the circular drive. Xander's Range Rover was parked in its usual spot, covered in a light dusting of November rain. That conversation was coming very soon. I walked downstairs and found Xander exactly where I expected him to be, in the kitchen, pouring scotch into a glass. At noon, his hands shaking badly enough that the bottle rattled against the rim. Our eyes met across the kitchen island. I spoke very quietly. "We need to talk about where the door is, Xander. The one you're going to use when you walk away from my family." Xander's glass stopped halfway to his lips. "What door?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, the same empty smile I'd given Dr. Harrington an hour ago. "The one I'm about to show you." Xander set down his scotch glass very slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. The door I was offering him wasn't mercy, it was survival. And the next morning, at 6 a.m., I showed him exactly where it led. The garage doors slid shut with a hydraulic hiss, sealing Xander Prescott inside, with me and Detective Lyle Redmond, on a Wednesday morning, that would decide whether my son-in-law walked into the DA's office or was dragged there in handcuffs. Redmond stood by the workbench, arms crossed, silent. I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the audio file. Xander's voice filled the garage, panicked and raw. "Elise, I can't do this anymore. He looked me right in the eye this morning, and I swear he knows." Xander's face went white. I let the recording play through, all of it. The confession about insurance, the hidden evidence, the admission that if things went sideways, everyone would go down. When it finished, I looked at my son-in-law and spoke very calmly. "You told Elise you made insurance," I said. "I need to know where it is, and I need to know in the next 60 seconds, or Redmond makes a phone call that ends your life as you know it." Xander's hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't hold his phone when I'd started the recording, the same hands that had signed offshore account documents that had held Wren at her christening, that were about to betray everyone he'd sworn loyalty to. "AC Manhattan," Xander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Box 447, shell company called Prescott Holdings, LLC. Everything's there, emails wire, instructions, the original Cayman documents." And I pressed. Xander looked at me, then at Redmond, then back at me. "You don't understand," he said. "This started 2 years ago, before Wren was even born. Sienna and Harrington, they'd been planning this since 2021. Harrington told her the estate was wasted on you, that you'd never see her potential unless she took control of it herself. 2 years. While Vera was dying in the hospital, while I was signing that codicil, Sienna was already being told by a corrupt psychiatrist that her father's land should be hers. "Hey, here's what happens next," I said. "You have 24 hours to walk into the Suffolk County DA's office with Detective Redmond. You hand over that safety deposit box key. You provide full testimony about the conspiracy, the poisoning, the forgery, everything. In exchange, Redmond will recommend reduced charges, misdemeanor probation, no jail time." "And if I don't?" Xander asked. "Then you face a full indictment as a co-conspirator," Redmond said. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, judicial forgery. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Xander sat down on my workshop stool, his head in his hands. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll cooperate." Good, I said. 3 days later, on Monday, November 18th, Sienna sat in a corporate office in Manhattan and signed the contract that would destroy her life. I wasn't there, Roland was. Roland's undercover operative had arranged the meeting at Atlantic Coastal Development's Manhattan office, a rented conference room in a midtown high-rise, professional and polished. Sienna arrived at 2 p.m. wearing a navy suit, carrying the forged temporary letters of guardianship that gave her authority to execute the sale. Roland watched from across the street, binoculars trained on the window phone pressed to his ear, keeping me updated in real time. "She's signing the first page," he said. "The Atlantic Coastal rep is handing her the wire authorization form." I was standing in my kitchen at Whale Nose Point, looking out at the ocean, listening. "Wire transfer executing," Roland said. $5 million Suffolk County to Atlantic Coastal's account in Delaware. Federal wire fraud the moment it clears. "She's using the forged guardianship papers to authorize the sale," Roland continued. "She just told the Atlantic Coastal rep that her father's condition makes this necessary, that she has full legal authority as conservator. Judicial forgery, elder abuse, wire fraud, all on federal record." "It's done," Roland said finally. "She signed everything. The wire cleared. $18 million sale contract minus the $5 million deposit. Arthur, she just signed her own indictment." I hung up and set the phone on the counter. Roland's voice carried something I hadn't heard from him in months, simple satisfaction. Not the tense, careful tone of a man still building a case. Just the exhale of someone who had watched a long operation finally reach its end. "She just signed her own indictment," I said to Redmond, who was standing in my kitchen monitoring the FBI comm channel. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, judicial forgery, all on federal record." Redmond nodded and spoke into his radio. "Target has executed. Move to phase 2. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table at dawn, on November 19th, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, my phone on the granite countertop. Redmond's text came through at 5:47 a.m. Warrant signed. Strike team assembles at 0800. You should be somewhere else. But I wasn't going anywhere. I was going to be right here when they came for her. The FBI came at 8 sharp on November 19th. I watched from the study window. By noon, Sienna was in federal custody. And the next morning, I drove to Riverhead Courthouse to end what she'd started. The pre-dawn mist clung to the Long Island Expressway like an accusation as Lydia Whitfield drove us toward Riverhead. In silence, the toxicology report and psychiatric evaluations sealed in her briefcase proof that my daughter had been poisoning me for 6 weeks and that Dr. Brennan Harrington had either missed it or ignored it. "You don't have to do this," Lydia said as we pulled into the courthouse parking lot. "The guardianship petition is essentially dead. Sienna's been arrested. You've already won." "I need to finish it," I said. We walked through security at 8:45. The hearing was scheduled for 9. Suffolk County Supreme Court Courtroom, 3B, Judge Margaret Weller presiding. She was 62, with 23 years on the bench, and a reputation for dismantling fraudulent conservatorships with surgical precision. I entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m., wearing a suit and tie, walking with steady steps, my mind razor sharp and my voice ready. Sienna sat 3 rows behind the petitioner's table, in a navy suit, spine rigid, eyes forward, refusing to look at me, refusing to acknowledge that the father she'd declared incompetent was about to dismantle her entire case with words she never thought I'd be allowed to speak. Judge Weller called the hearing to order. "This is an emergency petition for Article 81 guardianship," she said, reading from the docket. "Petitioner Sienna Gallagher seeks appointment as guardian of the person and property of Arthur Gallagher, age 60, citing severe progressive cognitive decline. Mr. Gallagher is represented by counsel. Ms. Whitfield, you may proceed." Lydia stood. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and professional. "I submit 2 independent psychiatric evaluations conducted within the past week. Dr. Nolan Hayes at Mount Sinai and Dr. Catherine Ruiz at Cornell. Both confirm that Mr. Gallagher exhibits no cognitive decline, no vascular dementia, and no impairment whatsoever. He is fully competent." She handed the documents to the court clerk. "I also submit," Lydia continued, "certified toxicology results from LabCorp showing therapeutic levels of quetiapine in Mr. Gallagher's bloodstream, an antipsychotic medication he was never prescribed and has never taken voluntarily." The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Weller took the toxicology report and read it carefully. Her expression shifted from procedural neutrality to something harder. "The chain of custody is unbroken," Lydia said. "A toxicology sample coffee residue collected from Mr. Gallagher's mug on October 5th was logged with Suffolk County PD under Detective Lyle Redmond's supervision on October 7th and analyzed by a certified independent lab. This isn't just medical evidence, Your Honor. It's criminal evidence. What Ms. Gallagher characterized as cognitive decline was in fact systematic poisoning." Judge Weller looked up at Sienna. "Ms. Gallagher, did you administer this medication to your father?" Sienna's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client invokes her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." "Noted," Judge Weller said. She turned to Dr. Harrington, who was sitting beside Sienna's attorney. "Dr. Harrington, you evaluated Mr. Gallagher on November 14th. Did you order toxicology screening as part of your assessment?" Harrington stood slowly. "No, Your Honor. Based on the behavioral presentation and family history provided, I determined—" "You determined incorrectly," Judge Weller said. "Mr. Gallagher, would you approach the bench?" I stood and walked forward. "Mr. Gallagher," Judge Weller said, looking at me directly. "Do you understand the proceedings taking place here today?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "My daughter filed a petition to have me declared incompetent so she could control my property and medical decisions. The petition is based on fraudulent psychiatric evaluations and evidence of cognitive decline that was caused by medication she administered without my knowledge or consent." Judge Weller nodded. "You may sit," she said. "Ms. Whitfield, call your next witness." "I call Dr. Brennan Harrington to the stand," Lydia said. Harrington took the witness stand, his $40,000 watch catching the courtroom lights. Lydia approached with a folder. "Dr. Harrington," she said, "in the matter of estate of Feldman, 2019, Nassau County, your psychiatric evaluation was the sole basis for an Article 81 guardianship petition. Is that correct?" "And Harrington shifted in his seat. Many cases resemble each other. Without reviewing specific files, the guardianship was overturned 18 months later." Lydia continued, "when the ward was evaluated by independent psychiatrists and found fully competent." "Do you recall that case, Vaguely, Harrington said. "And in 2021, Suffolk County, You provided evaluation for another Article 81 petition. That case ended when the alleged incompetent party died before proceedings concluded. Do you recall that case? I don't. I have Nassau County investigation logs, Lydia said, handing documents to the clerk, and Suffolk County deposition transcripts. Both show a pattern-rushed evaluations, financial relationships with petitioning family members, and guardianships later questioned for potential fraud. I watched Harrington's hands grip the witness stand rail, the same hands that had held a pen during the November 14th evaluation, writing moderate cognitive decline, while I sat across from him, performing confusion. I didn't feel and realized the doctor's trembling now was the first honest thing I'd seen from the man. Your Honor, Lydia said, Dr. Harrington has a documented pattern of providing questionable psychiatric evaluations in conservatorship fraud cases spanning at least 4 years. Judge Weller's expression was granite. Dr. Harrington, she said, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations? Before Harrington could answer, Detective Redmond stood from the back row and walked down the center aisle. Your Honor, Redmond said, may I approach? Proceed, Judge Weller said. Redmond walked to the witness stand. Dr. Harrington, he said, I'm Detective Lyle Redmond, Suffolk County PD. You are hereby notified that you are under active criminal investigation for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, professional fraud, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Harrington's face drained from ruddy confidence to ash gray in the span of 3 seconds. His eyes darted to Sienna, then to the courtroom exit, then back to Judge Weller. I saw the exact moment a man realized his career, his reputation, and his freedom were all ending in the same hour. Judge Weller's gavel came down. This hearing is suspended pending criminal proceedings, she said. The petition for guardianship is denied without prejudice. Dr. Harrington, you are excused from the stand. This court is adjourned. Xander Prescott walked into the courthouse hallway during the recess with his attorney and a leather portfolio that would end my daughter's freedom. His face pale but determined, and when his eyes met mine, I saw something I'd never seen in him before, the resolve of a man who'd chosen survival over loyalty. Detective Redmond stepped forward, hand extended. Xander's defense attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in a charcoal suit, placed the portfolio on the hallway bench and opened it with practiced efficiency. My client is prepared to provide full testimony in exchange for the cooperation agreement outlined in your proposal, she said. The evidence is comprehensive and documented. Inside the portfolio email correspondence between Sienna and Dr. Harrington, planning the psychiatric evaluation months before she ever brought me that clam chowder, pharmacy receipts showing quetiapine purchases under a false prescription issued to a patient who didn't exist, and a thumb drive. Redmond inserted the drive into his laptop. The hallway fell silent, except for the sound of courthouse foot traffic echoing through the marble corridors. This is Sienna Gallagher's voice, Redmond said, adjusting the volume. November 3rd, she's discussing transferring assets to offshore accounts before the conservatorship is finalized. My daughter's voice filled the hallway, not the voice she used with me, warm, concerned, daughterly. This was different, clinical, calculated. Nathan has the account numbers ready in Grand Cayman, she said on the recording. Once Harrington signs the evaluation, we file the Article 81 petition. Judge Weller will appoint me guardian within 30 days. Then we liquidate the Hamptons property, transfer the cash, and Dad becomes a line item in the budget. $600,000 a year to keep him comfortable until nature takes its course. I listened to my daughter's voice, clinical, calculated, discussing my estate like a commodity to be harvested, and realized this was the voice she used when I wasn't listening, when she thought I was too old or too trusting to notice the woman she'd become. Lydia's hand found my elbow. I hadn't realized I was swaying. Does Wren know what you're doing? I asked Xander quietly. His jaw tightened. She'll understand someday. Right now I just need her to have one parent who's not in prison. Redmond reviewed the cooperation agreement. In exchange for the evidence and testimony, Xander would plead guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of conspiracy with a suspended sentence and 2 years probation. No jail time. A chance to rebuild his life and relationship with his daughter. The audio recordings didn't just document asset liquidation plans. They proved premeditation. They proved Sienna knew exactly what she was doing when she slapped me across the face, when she locked me in my own home, when she poisoned my coffee with quidipine and waited for the cognitive decline that would justify Dr. Harrington's fraudulent evaluation. Every word on that thumb drive was another nail in her coffin recorded by the man she'd trusted as her partner in conspiracy destroying any claim of coercion or innocence she might have made. Lydia's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sienna just withdrew $800,000 from 3 different estate accounts, she said. Wire transfers to offshore holding companies. She's running. Redmond was already on his phone. Where? JFK Airport, Lydia said, reading from her screen. Terminal 4, one-way ticket to Grand Cayman, departing at 2:15 p.m. We reached JFK at 1:47 p.m. Terminal 4 was chaos families, reuniting business people sprinting for connections, tourists wrestling oversized luggage through security checkpoints. Gate 23 sat at the far end of Concourse B. FBI agents in tactical gear had already secured the boarding area. I saw Sienna before she saw me. She stood near the gate agent's desk with a carry-on bag and a leather purse, wearing sunglasses, despite the fluorescent terminal, lighting her posture, rigid with the tension of someone who knows they're being hunted but hasn't yet been caught. The FBI agent in charge, a woman with steel-gray hair and a voice that could cut glass, stepped forward as Sienna handed her boarding pass to the gate agent. "That's Sienna Gallagher. You're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and judicial forgery. Put your hands behind your back." Sienna froze. The boarding pass fell from her hand and fluttered to the industrial carpet. I stepped forward from behind the tactical line. Her eyes found mine through the sunglasses. She didn't remove them. "Atlantic Coastal Casino Development doesn't exist, Sienna," I said. "It was a federal shell company. You signed a contract with the FBI. Every wire transfer, every signature, all of it documented for prosecution. Atlantic Coastal Casino Development was never a real company. It was an FBI shell corporation created specifically to document Sienna's wire fraud, meaning every signature she made, every wire transfer she authorized, and every representation she signed was witnessed, recorded, and preserved as federal evidence by law enforcement. Lydia and Roland had set the trap. Sienna had walked into it willingly, greed blinding her to the impossibility of an $18 million casino deal materializing overnight. Sienna's carry-on bag sat open on the security table where agents had already searched it. 2 passports, one, American one, fake with her photo, and a different name. $47,000 in cash wrapped in rubber bands, and a single photo of Wren in a silver frame, the only piece of her daughter she was taking to a new life. Another woman stood near Gate 24 watching the arrest with wide eyes. 30s expensive clothes, designer luggage. She had a ticket to the same Grand Cayman flight clutched in her hand. "That's Elise Sinclair," Redmond said quietly. "Xander's mistress, Manhattan real estate broker. Looks like both women were planning to flee together. The affair was deeper than anyone knew. Xander hadn't just betrayed Sienna with evidence, he'd betrayed her with the woman who was supposed to help her escape." Sienna stared at me as the FBI agent pulled her hands behind her back. "You did this," she said. Her voice was flat, dead. "You set all of this up." "No," I said. "You did this when you decided your father's estate mattered more than his life." The handcuffs closed around Sienna's wrists with a metallic click that echoed across the terminal, and I watched my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful, broken daughter, turn to look at me one last time. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief, but underneath it, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read her the same story every night. That girl was gone. This woman was a stranger. I brewed coffee in a silent house on the morning after my daughter's arrest, watching steam rise from the mug Vera used every Sunday, and realized that winning felt exactly like losing, when the person you defeated was the one you'd loved most in the world. 2 days had passed since the handcuffs closed around Sienna's wrists at JFK. 2 days since I watched federal agents escort her through Terminal 4, while travelers stared and whispered. 2 days since I drove back to Whale Nose Point Estate alone, the house echoing with her absence. The Atlantic crashed against the rocks below my study window. November light slanted through the glass, pale and cold. My coffee sat untouched on Vera's desk, the same desk where Sienna had forged my signature 6 weeks ago, starting the cascade that ended with her in a Suffolk County cell. My phone rang at 9:30 a.m., Lydia Whitfield's name on the screen. "The federal docket is official," she said without preamble. 4 counts against Sienna, Wire fraud carries up to 20 years alone. Combined exposure is 25 years if she's convicted on all counts. I set the coffee down. The mug made no sound against the wood. And Harrington. Ein Westelates. Im Bupextor. 3 counts, Lydia said. Medical fraud, judicial forgery, conspiracy. He'll never practice medicine again even if he avoids prison. The state medical board suspended his license yesterday. 25 years. Sienna was 32 years old. She would be 39 when she got out, still younger than I was when I mapped my first major oil reserve, but old enough to have lost everything that mattered in between. How do you measure the distance between a daughter who poisons her father's coffee and the little girl who used to bring him drawings from kindergarten? Is it 6 weeks of quetiapine or 30 years of choices I never saw her making? What about Xander? I asked. Misdemeanor plea entered yesterday. 2 years probation, no jail time. He testified before the grand jury for 4 hours. The cooperation agreement is finalized. The $5 million wire transfer Sienna authorized to Atlantic Coastal Casino. Development sat frozen in a federal evidence account. Every signature, every email, every recorded phone call preserved for trial. The FBI shell company had done its work perfectly. Arthur, you won, Lydia said quietly. The conservatorship is dismissed, the estate is secure, and everyone who tried to take it is facing criminal prosecution. Why don't you sound relieved? Because relief required a villain, and all I saw when I closed my eyes was Sienna, at 7 years old, gap-toothed and laughing, holding a seashell she'd found on the beach, and asking if we could keep it forever. Thank you, Lydia, I said, for everything. I hung up and stared at the ocean until the coffee went cold. 7 days later, I drove to Suffolk County Jail for visiting hours. The facility squatted gray and institutional behind chain-link fencing, topped with razor-wire security cameras, tracking every vehicle that entered the parking lot. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while guards processed my ID and searched my belongings. The visitation room smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Plexiglass barriers divided the space into narrow booths, each with a metal stool bolted to the floor and a document slot at waist height. I sat in booth 7 and waited. Sienna appeared in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without makeup, dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked younger than 32. She looked like the daughter I'd raised before Roland Stafford and Dr. Harrington and the poison in my coffee. She sat. We stared at each other through scratched plexiglass. I slid a document through the slot. Certified copy, county seal, embossed in blue, dated September the 2020. This is your mother's codicil, I said. The one she had Jonathan draft 3 weeks before she died. The part of her will she never showed you. Read the postscript, her handwriting. Sienna's hands shook as she picked up the document. I watched her eyes scan the legal language, the asset schedules, the distribution instructions. Then she reached the final page. Her mother's handwriting filled the margin in blue ink, the same elegant script that wrote, "I love you," in every birthday card, every note in her lunchbox, every letter during her college years. Sienna read aloud, her voice breaking on every word. To my daughter Sienna, the estate transfers to you at age 35, requiring only that you share dinner with your father once monthly for 36 months. Love cannot be inherited, but presence can be practiced. She paused, tears falling. Mom? Through the scratched plexiglass barrier, I watched my daughter read her mother's handwriting and saw the exact moment understanding broke her. 36 dinners, Sienna whispered. I just had to show up for dinner. That's what she wanted, I said. That's all she ever wanted, for us to stay a family. Sienna was 32 years old. Age 35 would arrive in 2026, 3 years from now. 36 monthly dinners over 3 years. 3 hours a month sharing a meal, talking, being present. That was the price Vera had set for a $20 million estate. Not schemes or forgeries or poison, just presence. Vera's will revealed Sienna would have inherited the entire estate automatically at age 35, with only one condition: monthly family dinners for 3 years, meaning she poisoned her father, committed multiple felonies, and destroyed her life fighting for something she already possessed, needing only patience and presence. I would have had it all, Sienna said, staring at her mother's handwriting. In 3 years, I would have had everything. I nodded slowly, feeling Vera's presence in the space between us. My wife, who knew our daughter better than either of us, admitted who built a bridge Sienna burned before she ever knew it existed. Why didn't you tell me? Sienna's voice was barely audible through the speaker. Because your mother wanted you to earn it, I said. Not the money, the relationship. She wanted you to choose us, not the estate. Sienna's hands shook as she held her mother's will, tears streaming down her face. I would have had it all, she whispered again. In 3 years, I would have had everything. This was the moment Vera foresaw 3 years ago when she wrote that postscript, the moment her daughter learned what love actually cost. Not poison or conspiracy or federal wire fraud, just 36 dinners, just showing up. The sound of small shoes on gravel pulled me to the window on Thursday morning, and when I saw Wren climbing out of Roland Stafford's black sedan with a backpack shaped like a whale, I realized that in the wreckage of everything I'd destroyed to save my estate, this 8-year-old girl was the only innocent person left standing. I'd left Suffolk County Jail yesterday with Sienna's voice breaking on. I would have had it all. Now, her daughter stood in my driveway, adjusting whale-shaped straps, oblivious to the federal indictments that had restructured her family. Roland got out wearing jeans and a plain sweater, no lawyer costume. He retrieved a small suitcase from the trunk. I opened the door. Wren ran up the steps. Grandpa, she threw her arms around my waist. I knelt and held her breathing strawberry shampoo and crayons. Roland approached with the suitcase expression carefully neutral. Xander is dealing with legal matters, he said quietly. Probation meetings, court dates. He asked if you could take Wren for the weekend. Of course. Roland handed me the suitcase. Our eyes met. No smugness, no apology, just exhaustion. Her mother is unavailable. He added the word, doing heavy lifting to avoid saying incarcerated in front of a child who didn't need that word yet. Roland's face as he handed over Wren's backpack was unreadable. No smugness, no apology, just exhaustion. And I realized that even the men who helped build the right outcome carry their own weight afterward. He had done what needed doing. So had I. I'll pick her up Sunday evening, Roland said. He touched Wren's shoulder briefly, then walked to his car. We watched him drive away gravel, crunching under expensive tires. Is Uncle Roland sad? Wren asked. I think everyone is a little sad right now, I said. She considered this with the gravity of someone who understood more than adults gave her credit for. Can we go to the dock? Of course. We walked down the stone path, past Vera's rose garden, where November had stripped the bushes to thorns. The Atlantic stretched gray and infinite. The lighthouse stood white against the horizon. Wren sat at the dock's edge legs, dangling whale backpack beside her. I sat next to her, our reflections wavering in dark water below. Grandpa, are you sad? She asked. Daddy said you were sick, but you look okay now. I could have lied. Could have said everything was fine. But Vera always said children knew when you were lying, and they remembered. I knelt beside her. I was sad and I was scared, I said truthfully. But now I'm just here, and you're here, and that's enough. Wren nodded, slowly processing. Mommy said she has to stay somewhere else for a little while, she said. She said it's complicated. My heart broke cleanly a fracture I'd felt when Vera died. The kind that doesn't heal, but teaches you to function around the damage. It is complicated, I agreed. But you don't have to worry about complicated things. That's what grown-ups are for. Is Mommy okay? She's safe, I said, which was true if incomplete. And she loves you very much. Wren accepted this. A seagull cried overhead. This was Grandma's favorite spot, she said quietly. She used to bring me here, and we'd count boats. Once we counted 17. I remembered. Vera on this dock with Wren in her lap, pointing at distant sails, making up stories about where each boat was going. 3 summers ago, before the cancer, before the will, with its careful postscript about monthly dinners. Wren pulled something from her whale backpack construction paper, folded carefully. I made this for you, she said, unfolding it. Crayon on white paper, the estate house in wobbly lines and enthusiastic colors, the lighthouse standing tall, the ocean in horizontal blue scribbles. And on the dock, 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side. At the top, in uneven letters, home. Wren's hand slipped into mine as we sat on the dock, small and warm and trusting. And I remembered Sienna at this age doing the same thing before law school, and Roland and the slow calcification of love into strategy, and wondered if this was what Vera meant about presence being practiced. Do you like it? Wren asked. I love it, I said, and meant it with surprising intensity. Wren's crayon drawing showed the estate. the lighthouse, and 2 figures on the dock, grandfather and granddaughter, revealing that despite Sienna's attempt to steal my legacy, the true inheritance family connection place, belonging, had already passed to the next generation through a child's simple understanding of home. We sat together as afternoon light shifted clouds breaking to reveal patches of pale November sun. Wren told me about school, about her teacher Mrs. Reynolds teaching ecosystems, about her friend Emma, who had a hamster named Captain Fluffbottom. I listened and asked questions and felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight since Sienna brought poison clam chowder to my door. That evening, after grilled cheese and apple slices cut into stars, I stood in the kitchen holding Wren's drawing. The corkboard hung beside the refrigerator, the same board where Vera used to pin her weekly to-do lists, meal plans, appointment reminders, schedules for the family dinners Sienna would never attend. I removed the old calendar page still hanging there, dated October 2020, Vera's handwriting marking Sienna's birthday and dentist 2 p.m., and book club Thursday. I pinned Wren's drawing in the exact center, 2 crayon figures on the dock under a yellow sun that took up half the sky. The word home in uneven letters. For the first time since Vera died, I looked at that board and saw a future instead of a past. The March snow melted off the Hamptons beaches and dirty rivulets 4 months after my daughter's arrest. And when Lydia Whitfield called with the federal sentencing results from Brooklyn Court, a hearing I'd chosen not to attend, I was standing at the same window where I had watched Wren's crayon drawing fade in the winter sun. The drawing still hung on the kitchen corkboard, its construction paper curling at the edges, the yellow sun less vibrant than when Wren had drawn it in November. 4 months had passed since Roland brought her to my door with a whale-shaped backpack. 4 months of weekend visits, grilled cheese dinners, and careful explanations about why Mommy couldn't come home yet. Lydia's voice came through the phone, clear and professional. 7 years for Sienna, she said, without preamble. 5 for Harrington. The judge cited aggravated circumstances poisoning apparent abuse of medical authority. She'll be eligible for early release in 5 if she maintains good behavior. I watched the Atlantic through the living room window. The water looked the same as it had in November and October, in every season of the 60 years I'd lived in this house. Unchanging, indifferent. And the restitution, I asked. A full $5 million. The money goes back to the government since Atlantic Coastal was their operation. She'll be paying it off for decades, even after release. $5 million. The wire transfer sheet authorized to a company that didn't exist. Documented evidence of federal fraud, now a debt that would follow her the rest of her life. 7 years, I said quietly. She'll be 39 when she gets out. Wren will be 15. If Sienna served the minimum, 40 and 14 if she served the full sentence. I know, Lydia said. 7 years. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that her mother will be gone until she's in high school? That the bedtime stories and school plays and first crushes will all happen in visiting rooms, with plexiglass barriers and 30-minute time limits? What about Xander? I asked. 6 months into probation, no violations. He's working at a title insurance company in Garden City, living with his sister. Sees Wren twice a week under Roland's supervision. And Harrington, 5 years federal, permanent medical license revocation. The state board finalized it yesterday. He'll never practice medicine again, even if he serves minimal time. Dr. Brennan Harrington, who'd evaluated me in my own study and declared me cognitively incompetent based on a daughter's lies and a payment I'd never seen. 5 years seemed inadequate for the damage he'd done, but the permanent license revocation meant something. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. Sienna's 7-year federal sentence meant she'd serve until age 39, missing Wren's childhood, entirely ages 8 to 15. At minimum, the years that shape a person in ways no visitation room can replace. The conspiracy's consequences were no longer abstract legal punishment. They were the concrete loss of watching her daughter grow up. You did the right thing by not attending, Lydia said quietly. The courtroom was full of reporters. Your presence would have made it worse. I'd chosen to stay home, to stand at this window watching the ocean, instead of sitting in a Brooklyn federal courtroom, watching my daughter learn the price of poisoning her father. Some said that made me a coward. Some said it made me cruel. I thought it made me honest. I couldn't watch her sentence without feeling relief. And relief would have broken something in me I wasn't ready to lose. Thank you for calling, I said. Arthur, there's one more thing. We need to finalize Wren's trust documents. Can you meet me in Southampton next week? A Of course. 7 days later, I sat in a conference room in a Southampton law office with Lydia Whitfield and Roland Stafford. The March afternoon light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a parking lot, where expensive cars sat in neat rows. Lydia spread documents across the polished table: trust agreements, guardianship petitions, asset schedules, investment portfolio summaries. The irrevocable trust transfers the entire Whale Nose Point estate plus an $8 million investment portfolio to Wren, Lydia explained, distributed in thirds at ages 25, 30, and 35. Roland and I serve as co-trustees. She slid a highlighted paragraph toward me. The exclusion clause is permanent, she continued. Even after her release, Sienna cannot serve as trustee, cannot access the principal, cannot challenge the structure. This is irrevocable. I read the language. Dense legal prose that boiled down to one simple fact: I was legally forbidding my daughter from ever controlling her daughter's inheritance. Roland sat across from me, reading his own copy. He wore a gray suit, looked thinner than I remembered older. He picked up a pen. "You understand what you're doing, Arthur," he said quietly. "You're giving me legal authority over your granddaughter's entire inheritance, after everything that happened." "I'm giving Wren what Vera wanted," I said. "Security structure and people who won't steal from her. You taught Sienna to take it. Now you're going to teach Wren to receive. Consider it a penance." Roland's signature on the guardianship papers was confident and controlled the same handwriting that had appeared on dozens of documents over the past 2 months, building the case against my daughter. And I watched the pen move, understanding that some forms of loyalty are only proven under the kind of pressure that breaks lesser things. Lydia passed me another document. Family court petition designating Roland as Wren's legal guardian during Sienna's incarceration. "This completes the transfer of parental authority," Lydia said. "Roland becomes Wren's legal guardian until Sienna's release. He'll make all decisions regarding education as healthcare and residence." Roland Stafford, the man who had coordinated the FBI operation, built the shell company, and stood beside me through every week of this, was now designated as Wren's legal guardian and co-trustee of her entire inheritance. 34 years of friendship had been tested by fire. What remained was still standing. I signed my name on 8 different pages, initials here, full signature there. Lydia notarized each one with her embosser, the raised seal pressing into paper with a satisfying click. When it was done, Lydia slid the signed documents into her leather portfolio. I sat back in the conference room chair and realized this was the final piece Vera would have wanted Wren's future locked beyond Sienna's reach, protected by legal structures so ironclad that even a conspiracy couldn't penetrate them. But there was one thing: Vera's careful planning never accounted for the possibility that I would have to choose between my daughter's freedom and my granddaughter's security, and that choosing right would feel exactly like choosing wrong. The text came from an unlisted number on a Thursday in September. "Can we talk just once? I owe you that much. X." And I stared at the message for 5 full minutes before realizing that closure sometimes arrives from the people you least want to give it to. 6 months had passed since I'd signed the trust documents permanently, excluding Sienna and handing guardianship to Roland. Choosing right had felt like choosing wrong. I'd spent the summer learning to live with both truths. I texted back, "Where?" "At Sullivan's Diner, Saturday 3 p.m., just us." Saturday arrived overcast. Sullivan's Diner sat on a Southampton side street chrome and red vinyl, unchanged since the 1970s. I found Xander in a corner booth at 2:55 p.m., hands wrapped around untouched coffee. He'd lost weight. His face looked thinner, older than 36 should look. No wedding ring. I slid into the booth. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you owed me. I came to collect." A waitress brought coffee. 3 booths away, a woman sat alone with a paperback. 30s dark hair, expensive but understated clothing. Elise Sinclair, the mistress who was supposed to flee to Grand Cayman with Sienna, now sitting in a Southampton diner, giving Xander space, but present both of them building a different future on the ruins of someone else's conspiracy. "I'm not apologizing for getting caught," Xander said quietly. "I'm apologizing for being too weak to say no when Sienna first suggested it. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway because I was afraid of what she'd do if I didn't back her up. I knew it was wrong. I did it anyway because I was afraid of what Sienna would think if I didn't back her up." Xander's apology wasn't for getting caught or facing legal consequences. It was for the moral failure of choosing cowardice over integrity when Sienna first proposed the conspiracy, revealing that he understood it was wrong from the beginning, but lacked the courage to refuse making his betrayal a conscious choice rather than manipulation. "Fear, I understand," I said. "Using fear as permission to destroy someone that I don't forgive. You're an architect, Xander. You built things for a living. You knew exactly what you were helping to tear down." He flinched. "I know," he said. "I'll carry that the rest of my life. I just wanted you to know I'm carrying it." The waitress refilled our mugs. Diner sounds filled the silent silverware on plates, the grill's hiss-quiet conversation. "How's probation?" I asked. 18 months and no violations. Working at a title insurance company. Boring but honest." He paused. "The divorce finalized in August. And Ren? I see her twice a week. Roland supervises. She asks about Sienna less now. That hurt more than it should have. What do you tell her? That mommy made mistakes and has to fix them. That it's not her fault. That she's loved." His voice cracked. "Roland coaches me on what to say. He's better at it than I expected." "I'm relocating to Austin in January," Xander added. "Starting over. Elise has family there." We sat in silence. "Then carry it well," I said finally. "And be a better father to Ren than you were a son-in-law to me." Xander nodded. When we stood to leave, he extended his hand. I looked at it for a long moment, then shook it. Not as friends or family, but as two men no longer at war. Elise joined him at the door. They left together, her hand finding his. I drove home along the coast road windows, down salt air mixing with approaching rain. That night, October 14th, the eve of Vera's birthday, I sat in my study with good paper and the fountain pen she'd given me for our 30th anniversary. The ritual had sustained me for years, writing letters to my dead wife, never mailing them, but burning them as release. I wrote, "Dear V, you would have been 73 tomorrow. Ren asked what we should do for your birthday. I said we'd bake your lemon cake and eat it on the dock while we count boats. You were right about everything, V, especially the hard part that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. That boundaries aren't betrayal, that protecting Ren mattered more than saving Sienna from herself. I met with Xander today. He apologized for being weak. I accepted it without forgiving it. You'd have found some gracious middle ground. I did the best I could. I don't know if our daughter will ever understand what you tried to teach her. But Ren will. I'll make sure Ren understands that inheritance isn't just money and property. It's knowing when to hold on and when to let go." Sienna was 32 years old enough to remember the before and after, old enough to have chosen differently at every step. "I haven't visited. I don't know if I will. Does that make me cruel or just honest? You always said the difference was intent. Happy birthday, my love. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And so is Ren. Yours always, A." I carried the letter to the deck. October night, clear and cold stars visible above the Atlantic darkness. I placed the pages in the metal fire bowl Vera had used for beach bonfires. Struck a match. The letter pages curled and blackened edges glowing orange before disintegrating into ash. The same way grief works, I thought, burning through everything solid until only the residue remains light enough to be carried away by wind and tide. Arthur's letter-burning ritual revealed he'd been processing grief and impossible decisions by writing to Vera for years, never mailing, but burning the letters as release. And his final acknowledgement that Vera was right about everything showed he'd internalized her wisdom, that protecting Ren required setting boundaries with Sienna, not choosing between them, but accepting both truths simultaneously. I watched the last fragment of ash disappear into Atlantic darkness, then walked back inside to the kitchen, where Ren's latest drawing, a family of whales breaching under a rainbow, was pinned next to her school calendar. I checked the date, Sunday 2 days away, marked in her wobbly handwriting with a star. Pancake breakfast with Grandpa. For the first time in 11 months, I realized I wasn't just surviving the aftermath, I was living in what comes next. The sound of bare feet pattering down the hallway at 7 on a Sunday morning in late October was the best alarm clock I'd ever had, better than coffee, better than sunrise, better than the silence that used to fill this house before my granddaughter learned that Whale Nose Point Estate was the one place she never had to ask permission to belong. What comes next, I'd realized 2 days ago, standing in my kitchen, wasn't some distant future I had to reach. It was already here. Ren's drawings on the corkboard, Sunday pancakes, the sound of small feet on hardwood floors. This Sunday morning, I stood in the kitchen at dawn, preparing Vera's clam chowder recipe. not pancakes, chowder. Because exactly 1 year ago today, a Friday in late September 2023, my daughter Sienna had arrived at this door carrying clam chowder wrapped in a kitchen towel and a manila folder hidden in her bag that would have taken everything, and a conservatorship petition that would destroy our family. 1 year later, I was making the same recipe for the granddaughter who'd earned this house by doing what Sienna never learned, showing up without asking what she'd get in return. Ren appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon whales, hair tangled from sleep, clutching the stuffed orca I'd bought her in August. "You're making Grandma's soup," she said, climbing onto the kitchen stool. "I am. Want to help?" She nodded eagerly. I handed her a wooden spoon and let her stir while I diced potatoes. The clam chowder bubbled on the stove, the same way Vera used to make it thick with potatoes and bacon, smelling like Sunday mornings when family meant safety instead of strategy, before law degrees and offshore accounts turned love into a zero-sum game where only one person could win the house. Like Grandpa Ren asked, watching the soup bubble. "Yes." "What did Grandma Vera look like?" I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. Ren had been 4 when Vera died. The memories were fading. "Exactly like you when you smile," I said. "She had your eyes and your way of tilting your head when you're thinking hard about something." "Did she like the ocean?" "She loved it. We used to sit on the deck every Sunday morning and count boats, just like you and I do." Ren stirred the pot carefully, focused on keeping the spoon moving in the smooth circles. "Uncle Roland says Mommy might get out early if she's good," she said quietly. "In 4 more years instead of 6. My hand stilled on the knife. "That's true," I said. "Does that scare you?" "A little. I don't really remember her very much anymore." "Is that bad?" I set down the knife and knelt beside the stool so we were eye level. "No, sweetheart. You were 8 when she left. You're 9 now. It's okay if the memories get fuzzy." "Will she be mad that I live here with you instead of waiting for her?" And best music stole. The question broke something in my chest and mended it simultaneously. "Your mother made choices that have consequences," I said carefully. "You didn't make those choices. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Ren nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to stirring. We carried bowls of chowder to the deck an hour later. The October morning was crisp and clear, the Atlantic stretching endless and gray-blue under pale sun. The Montauk Lighthouse stood white against the horizon, its beacon invisible in daylight, but present nonetheless, waiting for darkness to guide ships home. Ren ate with enthusiasm, getting more chowder on her face than in her mouth. I watched her and thought about Vera's will, about the 36 dinners Sienna had needed to share over 3 years to inherit this estate. Simple presence. That's all Vera had asked for. Ren had given me 52 Sundays in the past year, pancakes and boat counting and crayon drawings and questions about grandmothers she barely remembered. She'd earned this house 100 times over. "Your grandmother taught me 3 things, I said, setting down my spoon. "Want to hear them?" Ren nodded, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "If first loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you. You can love somebody and still say no when they try to take things that aren't theirs. Like Mommy tried to take the house." I hesitated, then nodded. "Like that. Second, this house doesn't belong to whoever wants it most. It belongs to whoever earns it by staying, by being here, by making it home." "I like being here," Ren said simply. "I know you do. That's why this is your home now, not someday when you're older, now." She smiled, and I saw Vera in the curve of her mouth, in the light in her eyes. "Third family isn't something you inherit. It's something you build one Sunday at a time." Ren considered this while scraping the last of her chowder from the bowl. "We're building it right now, aren't we?" she asked. "We are." The afternoon faded to twilight. We sat on the deck watching the lighthouse beacon pulse across darkening water, its rhythm steady and unchanging. Ren's hand slipped into mine, small and warm and trusting, and I realized this was what Vera meant all along. Not that Sienna had to earn forgiveness, but that Ren would earn belonging simply by being present, building the inheritance that matters more than deeds and trusts, the knowledge that someone will always be waiting when you come home. Grandpa Ren asked as the first stars appeared. "Yes. Can I stay one more day by spad? I squeezed her hand. "You can stay always, Ren. This is your home, not someday when you're older. Now." She leaned against my shoulder, satisfied. We sat together as darkness settled over Whale Nose Point Estate, the lighthouse beam sweeping across the water, in patient intervals, the house behind us warm and lit, and full of the kind of peace that only comes after impossible wars. The estate keys now belong to Wren, not through legal documents, conservatorship petitions, or inheritance paperwork, but through earned love and weekly presence she accomplished in 1 year, what Vera's will required, and what Sienna destroyed her life trying to steal, proving that sanctuary is granted to those who understand home is not a transaction. Later, I watched Wren carry her empty chowder bowl to the kitchen sink, the same bowl Vera used, the same Sunday ritual, the same house that almost became a crime scene instead of a sanctuary. The estate keys hung on the hook by the door, bronze and worn, waiting for the day Wren is old enough to understand they've been hers all along. Not because of paperwork, because she showed up, because she stayed, because love, it turns out, is the only deed that matters. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes protecting what matters most means losing the person you thought you were protecting it for. I spent 30 years raising Sienna, thinking love meant never saying no. That was my mistake. I enabled her entitlement by giving without requiring presence. When Vera wrote that, while requiring monthly dinners, I thought it was cruel. Now, I understand she was teaching us that family is earned through showing up, not through legal documents alone. The hardest lesson I learned is this: you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. That's not betrayal, that's survival. Sienna thought this was dad, family revenge, a father hoarding wealth from his rightful heir. But God put me through this test to show me a different truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Real family isn't about revenge or entitlement. It's about presence. It's Wren's hand in mine on Sunday mornings. What Sienna tried to steal Wren earned by simply showing up. That's the inheritance that matters. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, tell me what you would have done. Was this dad family revenge, or was it protection? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. This community we're building together means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time is valuable, and you spent it here. I don't take that lightly. Final note: certain details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What I hope stays with you is the lesson. God bless you.